Okay, cool. Hey everyone, I'm joined today with Erik Kain. How are you doing today, Erik?
Good. How you doing?
Hey, not too bad, not too bad. This is the first time we've talked, at the very least in a long time, if not ever. So,
Yep.
how are you doing?
Yeah, doing well. Thanks for thinking of me
Yeah,
for this.
absolutely. I reached out to you a while ago, and we're just now setting this up. So, um,
Yeah.
I've read a little bit of your coverage of GamerGate. You wrote several articles for Forbes, I believe 4 articles, right?
Maybe.
Uh,
Probably more than that when you take in all the different angles over the years, but around that time, I would say probably ish. Yeah. And
okay.
then did a lot of different you know, I talked with different people in different YouTube videos and in other settings, but yeah, just a few actual pieces on Gamergate itself.
There is a little bit of a background noise whenever you talk. It's
Oh,
staticky a little bit.
it's probably my AC unit, honestly.
Oh, that could be.
Um, I don't
It's
know. There's much we can do about it. It's going to be too hot in here if I don't have it on. So I could trying to think.
it's okay right now.
Okay,
Well,
I
it's
could turn down
intermittent.
my gain, but yeah,
Yeah, it's intermittent. The sound is.
I can I can try turning down the gain on my microphone and see if that helps. Um, but yeah, this is just a tricky time of year because it's so hot that if I don't have my AC unit going, I'm gonna be sweating like a pig in just a few 20 minutes. So hopefully, just let me know and I can keep adjusting sound and stuff.
Okay. A couple of your articles, you talked about a lot of different things about GamerGate, most of which I've covered throughout this project. But I do want to ask you about the Fine Young Capitalist situation, just because I don't feel like I've done like as in depth of a coverage of that as I would have liked. So could you tell us what you saw with the Fine Young Capitalist situation?
Oh my God. The fine young. I don't even remember. Honestly, this is like a decade ago, and I don't remember all that much about that particular angle.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. I honestly like this is literally exactly 10 years ago from when I wrote a few pieces about this. And I would say that my coverage generally was focused more on broad stroke stuff like consumerism and consumer activism and how this sort of blew up because of earlier sort of trends that had been going on within the gaming community rather than like real specific stuff about all the different people involved, right? There were a lot of people involved that I really don't remember or care. I mean, like I would say there are certain figures that I definitely remember, like Milo, who I talked a lot with at the time. But I think that my I don't know what to call it expertise. My my main subject matter was really about how sort of earlier things like Mass Effect 3's ending and the retake Mass Effect movement and other stuff like that has sort of already shaped the state of affairs that we found ourselves in 2014 when that whole uh, Gamergate, if you want to call it, which is just a hashtag, but when that all blew up, when the whole Five Guys thing and all that. So
Okay.
I mean, I yeah,
Well, you wrote about the Fine Young Capitalist in one of your articles. That's why I
yeah.
wanted to bring it up with you. But
I bet I
you,
don't even remember what I wrote about a week ago because I since then I've probably written several thousand things. So yeah, I could look it up.
no, it's
I
okay.
could look at my own article.
Well, I can just give people
But
a rundown, I guess, real quick. And you could correct me if you remember anything that was wrong. Remember, it was a game jam created to promote women in gaming. They worked with Autobotica. I've interviewed one of the people who worked on the game. I guess that's probably enough coverage of it. And then Zoe Quinn didn't like this because she thought it was transphobic because you had to have transitioned it before a certain deadline. So she and Maya Kramer tried to destroy it. But it ended up kind of backfiring because people thought, well, hey, this is kind of shitty behavior. You probably shouldn't do that. And she had her own competing organization, the Rebel Game Jam, which was a scam. But anyway, we don't have to go into all that. Anyway, you wrote about it, and I didn't really cover it that well. I don't think so. I thought we'd bring it up, but you probably don't remember the Wolf Wozniak accusation either, do you, against Quinn? Because you wrote about that as
mm,
well in your article.
I'm reading about it now. But yeah, like all this stuff, I probably didn't even remember it a year later. And here, that's another thing I would say about Gamergate is that a lot of this stuff If it had just been treated like any normal bit of controversy, probably everyone would have forgotten about it within a few months. It just blew up because everyone got shut down when they tried to talk about it.
Yeah. Now you say that you talked with Milo a bit. I'm possibly interviewing him. He recently agreed to do one, but has been
Hmm.
very quiet when it comes to me
Mm-hmm.
pushing him to schedule. So, one, what do you think of
Uh-huh.
Milo? And two, do you think he's actually going to do the interview? Or is he going to run away?
I haven't talked to Milo in years and years and years. I don't know. Milo had his 15 minutes of fame essentially right around then. He's a very charming guy. He's very, very smart. And he really likes to be the center of attention, I would say. And he likes to do that by poking as many bears as he can. And he was very, very, very good at sort of fanning the flames of controversy and trolling on a kind of higher podium than most trolls get to. I liked Milo personally, even though I disagree with almost everything he says or believes. Um, but I thought he was articulate and sharp and a good writer. Um, but then again, then everything came crashing down for him, and he was sort of chased out of the conservative movement because of the statements he made about having sex with teenage boys, which is pretty verboten in the conservative movement, or any movement for that matter. But then then as far as I could tell, after he was booted off Twitter and whatnot, I think he's back now.
He
He
is,
was
yeah.
like doing videos for the Alex Jones show and like kind of like a very big career change. I've wanted to talk with him actually again because it's been so long. Whether he'll do this, I have no idea because it's just again that's like a lifetime ago in the especially in the internet. 10. It's been I suppose it's been a little less than 10 years since I've spoken with him, but whether he'll want to be involved in anything like I have no idea honestly.
Yeah, I hope he does it. He knows it's going to be a tough interview because I'm not going to go easy on him. I think
Yeah.
his story is an interesting one. I think it would be worth
Hmm.
including. I also
Oh
think that
yeah.
he's gone in a very bad direction. I mean, did you know that? Did you see his debate with Destiny, where he argues that the Comics Code Authority was good? So like he's
No.
completely, yeah, he's gone a very
Yeah.
different
No.
direction than what he was.
No. I haven't really seen anything but just like little bits and pieces for years now. So yeah, I have no idea. It always struck me that Milo was more interested in Milo than in anything specifically ideological necessarily. He was more interested, like before Gamergate, he didn't care about video games at
No,
all.
I
Like
agree.
that wasn't a thing for him, and he wasn't invested in video games. I mean, he'd even written stuff critical of gamers and critical of video games and all that, bullshit that we got from the moral majority prior to the modern era. So as much as I was cordial with Milo at the time, I was very skeptical and very. I wanted gamers to be more skeptical of him because I felt like this was very much he was using this as a leap off pad, right? A leaping pad to propel his own career, which he did very, very well, right? Into Breitbart and sort of becoming more and more prominent, got a lot of speaking tour stuff and all that. He successfully navigated his career vis-a-vis Gamergate, but he was never a gamer and he was never into gaming. Now, a lot of people would say, well, he wasn't as shitty to gamers as the gaming press often is. And that may be true. But I think it was a lot of opportunistic, and I don't even mean that. I don't even think he would disagree with me. It was opportunistic. He
Well,
was
we'll see if he
opportunistic.
disagrees, right?
Yeah, no,
But
absolutely. Like me and Milo, we argued on a couple different YouTube channels. He interviewed me once. He offered me a job at Breitbart, which I did not accept. But I think he was very much invested in propelling his career and then becoming part of the Trump movement, right? Much more than he was interested in video games. And I just don't think that's really an opinion so much as just an obvious truth.
Yeah, I agree.
Like,
Now you mentioned the Mass Effect controversy. A lot of people wrote articles about this, I believe, including you.
I did.
So do you want to talk
Uh,
about this? What was your take at the time, and what's your take today?
yeah, so I'd only just begun writing about video games before Mass Effect 3 came out. I'd been doing other stuff, other journalism, and I'd always been a gamer, but I hadn't been involved in the gaming community that much, right? Like this was like I was young, but not like involved in forums or like the gaming culture really so much. So when Mass Effect 3 came out and people were super upset about it, it was something I really had to look into to figure out why. Like there was a lot of stuff about, oh well, people are mad because there's gay romances and there's, and there was a lot of stuff that came out like these gamers are entitled, right? My first Colin Moriarty and I are friends now, but at the time he'd written something calling gamers entitled little emperors, and I pushed back on that and I said, actually, gamers are consumers. They're allowed to be angry about the ending of this game. They're allowed to be angry about where this franchise has gone because of, the ending was not what they were led to believe would happen. And Colin is actually we've talked about this since, and I think he actually felt like that helped him see a new perspective, which is crazy because usually when you criticize somebody's writing online, they don't take that as a learning opportunity. They get mad at you and
True.
try to cancel you or something. So I have massive respect for Colin because of that. Even though Colin and I, again, we are on opposite sides of the political spectrum. He's, a conservative. I am not a conservative, and everything else. I can talk with Colin. He's I think of a very honest person and an honest broker. So I appreciate him in a lot of ways. But at the time, a lot of what I saw was all of these articles saying a very similar thing, which is that gamers are entitled, gamers are bigots, gamers are this and that. And this is 2012. And so at the time, my coverage was a lot about like, well, actually, yeah, sure, so there are some bigots out there, but gamers are pissed off, and they're pissed off at the game, but now they're pissed off at the journalists who are writing these articles, who seem to be playing ball for the game developers themselves, right? They are defending these corporations rather than speaking up for gamers who are the customers, right? And in access media, of course, there's this tension, right? It's access media. That's called that for a reason. We are given access by the people we cover, right? We're given review copies. We're given preview opportunities or screeners for TV or whatever else. We need access to cover this stuff. And so there's this sense that, journalists are placing their access over the duty they have to tell the truth to consumers or to be on the consumer side. Because, when you're writing reviews, when you're covering these things, you should be at least partly writing a perspective that is helping consumers, whether that's to make a decision or just giving their point of view some credence. And so that's, I don't remember the specific things I wrote at the time, but that very much shaped where I saw things going in 2014 when GamerGate, when we saw the same publications at even greater quantity publish all the gamers are dead articles. Gamers are dead. We don't need gamers. Gamers are dead, very much like entitled gamers in 2012. And very much, I think, between 2012 and 2014, there had been various instances, like with DMC, the Devil May Cry game, and other things, where that hostility between the game press and the gaming community had really started to reach a higher and higher level. By the time GamerGate happened, there was so much distrust and antagonism and hostility built up between gaming journalists and gamers. Not all gamers, obviously. There's obviously a lot of more complexity to that. But by the time that had happened, while all these people were saying, well, this is just a movement to get women out of games, this is just a movement that's anti, that's a racist movement. I was saying, look at what's happened over the last couple of years. Like, this is a movement that while it may have some sexist and some harassing people, that a lot of the energy behind this movement is driven by consumers who are angry at the gaming press for what's been going on for the last couple of years. Maybe irrationally angry, maybe it's gone overboard, right? But there was this sense, and then of course the gaming press just like feeds into this with the gamers are dead, we don't need gamers, all that stuff. And so my perspective at the time was just that this is actually, you know, whatever you want to say about all the different people involved, all the personalities, which I really give a shit about. I don't care about which YouTuber said what. I don't care about which, you know, copycat game journalist wrote the same stupid article as the rest of the copycat game journalists. I don't, you know, what I care about is looking at the big picture, zooming out a little ways and saying, this has been in the works for years, and this was just the match that ignited all of this anger and all of this angst and all of this like all the, you know, people saying, see, I told you so. See, look, all these journalists are conspiring together, right? Look at all the headlines that are exactly the same. And they're, you know, again, they're circling the wagons. Why? What are they trying to hide, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I think a lot of stuff that was said about game journalists was probably conspiratorial and not necessarily true. I think that the truth is usually a lot more boring. But that's how I saw it. This was the uproar surrounding a consumer movement that, if you looked back at Mass Effect and you saw the retake Mass Effect movement, I would say it was a much more jovial movement than GamerGate, right? A lot less heated. But there were still complaints that people were getting harassed and all that. And I think that it's just that the nature of what happened with GamerGate was that, you know, no one was allowed to discuss it on Reddit or in other forums, and it was shut down. And so it just, when you try to shut something down, you know, that's the difference between the Mass Effect thing and when Mass Effect was going on. It was people were able to like let their voices be heard, and then BioWare was able to come out with a DLC that kind of addressed some of those concerns. And GamerGate was just, you know, I know that the subject, the Five Guys expose or whatever, the jilted lovers, Aaron Gonji or whatever his name was.
But so
yeah,
we're jumping way
stop.
a lot. Okay, so
this
first
is how
off,
I think about this.
Was there a movement with the Mass Effect stuff? Would you call it that, or was it just like was it a movement or no?
Retake Mass Effect was definitely a movement. There was definitely people coordinating and trying to, you know, do stuff to protest what happened with the ending and to demand a better ending and all of that. I wasn't part of it, but I wrote about it at the time, and I definitely talked with people who were part of it. I don't know, you know, it's so hard to tell in an online movement, right? Like, what is it really like? Is it just people on some message boards? Is it you know, people actually getting together? Or like back then, and you know, with Mass Effect, this was even like YouTube was even smaller than by the time GamerGate was around, and so a lot of this was just not that visible, but it was definitely happening.
Okay. Now you also, so you mentioned the jilted X, like that's you know, what do you think of like framing it that way? Like, is that dismissive of Joni or and what he went through?
I don't know. That's all a bunch of none of my business as far as I'm concerned. I mean, like it's just like by his account, she acted horribly, and you know, I don't care to watch reality TV shows and that kind of stuff. Like, I think that the crux of that was, did she, you know, sleep with a game journalist to get coverage of her game? And like, it's, who knows, right? I mean, there's not enough evidence.
We can't. Well, we know we do know that like they did sleep together, and we do know that he did promote her game. But it's just, is that the reason they did it? You know, who knows, right? Maybe they were in love. Maybe, who knows, right? Who knows?
I mean, she could have easily
rocked up at a convention. You know, who cares?
I mean, the games industry is constantly trying to get people to promote their shit, and you know, like you know, look at Activision will fly, or EA or any of these companies will fly influencers out to their lavish events and shower them with gifts and money and all this stuff. And to me, that's, you know, probably more scandalous than if some indie developer slept with a guy.
Well, if he's a journalist, that's not, who cares about Quinn's role, really, right? It's more about Grayson.
Right. Sure, it is. But I mean, what about all the journalists that are flown to events by publishers and all that stuff. I
Well,
mean,
they
that's a
should
monetary
disclose
exchange.
those conflicts of interest as well,
Right.
right? Yeah. So I want to ask you, can you define what Gamergate was?
um, no, because it's not one thing. I mean, it's not even one thing. It's temporally not one thing, because what it began as and what it became and what it represents to different people are all different things, right? So what Gamergate began as, I would say, is some kind of muddled consumer backlash to perceived censorship and corruption, right? What it became was a much, much more right-wing leaning movement, thanks to the influence of people like Milo and the soon rise of Trump. I think there's a lot of odd connections there, and I think what it represented to a lot of people, it just depends on who you were. I don't think I could say what I don't think it was. I don't think it was a coordinated harassment campaign, but I do think that some people involved in it were very interested in harassment. And I think it was also a battleground for people who had already disliked each other ahead of time. And it was a reason for them to fight. There were trolls, both left-wing trolls and right-wing trolls, I think, that just used it as another way to sort of take pot shots at one another. I think there were a lot of YouTubers that used it as a way to drive engagement. And I think there were people like Brianna Wu who used it as a way to advance her political career. And so I think that it's just so many different things to so many different people. And at different times, because again, like I would say that the early days of Gamergate were radically different than maybe a couple of years later, when people who were still sort of considering themselves part of that movement were around.
Okay, so there's so many jumping off points too. All right, so I guess we have a whole politics section later on. Do you want to jump into the politics stuff now with regards to Gamergate, or do you want to jump into it when we get to that section?
Whatever.
Okay, so well, you
You know,
mentioned that Gamergate, in your view, was like right wing or became right wing over time. So what's your
it
best
definitely.
evidence? Like, what's your best argument for that, or best evidence you've seen that you found convincing?
I think that Gamergate was happening at the same time that the sort of early days of what we would call the woke movement was happening. And the woke movement, I would say, is a firmly left-wing movement, one that I'm personally not fond of. But I would say that Gamergate sort of grew into something that was anti-woke, and thus part of a more, generally speaking, right-wing movement. I would say that before all that, or at least during that process, again, the rise of people like Milo Yiannopoulos and other right-leaning figures sort of became the voice or the public face of Gamergate. And I think that this is anecdotal, but talking with a lot of people online, I think I saw a lot of people who were part of Gamergate say, well, we're not really part of this anymore because it's moved too far to the right. And you saw the conversation steer more and more towards right-wing subject matter. A lot of it was, suddenly under the fold of Breitbart and so on and so forth.
Well,
So
you say
really,
right. When you say right wing, can you do you mean what do you mean by right wing exactly?
I would say it just depends, because Gamergate is, I guess it began so really focused on video games, and I think that as it progressed, the subject matter expanded. I would say right-wing social politics, that resistance to, I would say at the time, what people refer to as social justice warriors, which I don't ever hear that term anymore, but SJWs. Gamergate was very anti-SJW. It was very, it was, and again, I would say that because game journalists are mostly left wing, what we saw as the backlash to game journalists, the sort of reactionary backlash to game journalism, took on a right wing shape. And a lot of the things that game journalists have been pushing since then and during and before then, which would be like um, more representation or more queer inclusion or more female protagonists, all the feminist stuff. I would say the Gamergate was very anti-feminist. And so I would say if you don't want to use right wing, you could say reactionary or even revanchist. But effectively, I would say that a lot of it is a I don't even know if you want to call it a movement. It is a reaction to the left wing politics that were especially in games journalism at the time, and that we've seen make their way into the broader gaming industry.
Okay. So, in your view, is like opposing, like, I don't know, like the worst aspects of wokeness, let's say, is that the same as right wing in your view? 'Cause-
Not exactly, but I would say that because I don't consider myself right wing, but I don't agree with a lot of wokeness. Um, but I would say that right wing politics are generally speaking reactionary politics. They're their right wing politics are always reacting to, let's say, left wing overreach or the march of progress. Right wing politics are uh, reacting and trying to halt that or push that back. And that's very broad strokes. But so, for instance, um, when Anita Sarkeesian, like you're right, her feminist frequency stuff, she argued for a lot of a lot more female voices in the video game industry, and I would say that the conservative reaction to that is largely that that this is a feminist overreach, that they're trying to go too far, that games. And again, you don't have to be right wing to think these things either, but I think that they a lot of them fall within the fold of a larger right wing worldview.
Well, was the critique of Sarkeesian, do you think it was that, like, okay, look, we don't want a woman coming in here and making her political critiques of our video? Or was it more against like the specific things that she was saying, right? Like in regards to either
Mm.
games that she got wrong or misrepresenting gameplay footage or
Yeah,
being rather extreme and saying that everyone who disagrees with her is a harasser.
yeah. No, I think
I
there's a
think it
little
was
bit of both.
okay.
I think it's both. Yeah, I mean, I think that someone like Sarkeesian is definitely she's speaking to a different audience than a lot of gamers, right? Like her audience is much more um, the the left wing collegiate, like gender studies, all that stuff, and she doesn't seem. I think there's a sense with Sarkeesian and with a lot of game journalists, they don't seem authentic, like authentically involved in gaming in the way that a lot of gamers are. Like they're not really one of us. They're imposters sneaking their way into the fold and trying to change things. So I think there's a legitimate like apolitical critique of Sarkeesian, but I would think there's also very much a political anti-feminism in general critique as well that exists. So I think both of those things coexist.
Okay. The reason I'm pushing a little bit on the right wing characterization, just to get your views more, really more than anything else, is because I ask most people this question, and with the exception of Michael Koretsky and some of the anti-Gamergate people, I don't know. Maybe one pro person said yes. I don't, or they caveated it, I think, quite heavily. But almost no one else seems to think that the right wing characterization was true. And like if you look at like the surveys done at the time, both the early surveys, which those weren't scientific necessarily, right? The
Right.
but the later surveys that were scientific, like Chris Ferguson's published paper on Gamergate, him and Brad Glasgow interviewed. I'm not sure if you remember this in 2015, 2016. They interviewed like 1,000 people for their survey, and they verified each one of them had supported Gamergate prior to them announcing the survey. So they had to have proof, whether Reddit posts or tweets or something, say, hey, look, here's proof that I supported Gamergate, and send that in with when they applied to participate. And in all of these cases, it all shows that they were mostly, it was a very diverse group of people. There were a lot of conservatives, libertarians, socialists, communists, but also like
Sure.
it was mostly our plurality, um, liberal or center left. Um, whereas like now, if you read like well, one your characterization, right, and then two, like Asia Romano of Vox and like these other places, try to link GamerGate to Trump getting elected, and it doesn't seem like there's like good evidence for that.
So I think, well, I think first of all, self-identification of political standing is only so useful. Like your politics, what you think your politics are versus where they actually fit into the current political uh, framework, the current political landscape is very difficult to pin down. I mean, like, for instance, I've always thought of myself as pretty left wing, but over the last 10 years, I would say the left wing has shifted, putting me much closer to the right wing than I was before, right? A lot of the stuff that's come up over the last few years, which I would say like anti-racism, gender politics, the trans movement, all of that stuff has pushed the left on those issues further to the left. And I just don't necessarily think I've moved at all, but that pushes me further from the left. So our location, our self-identification on the political, whatever the what you want to call it, is only so useful. So you have to also look at you know where the politics themselves have moved in relation to the people answering a survey like that, which makes it more complicated. I would also say that, like, again, I would say that in the beginning of the Gamergate movement, it was a much more diverse group of people that were part of that. But as it went on over the years, I think it shifted much more to the right and much more. And I think that that's just like, again, because Milo and because of these other, like Breitbart and everything, their involvement in Gamergate pushed that conversation to the right and pushed it directly towards Trump. Now, I don't think Gamergate helped elect Trump, but I think there is a clear link between the two, between how online movements functioned and what political operatives learned from that during that time period. Absolutely.
Okay.
I don't think Gamergate. Yeah, I think
So
it's ludicrous to think Gamergate actually led to Trump. But were there lessons learned? Were there lessons learned in how to deal with the media? Were there lessons learned? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
now that might be true about lessons learned. Because it's a major event. People could look at it and draw things from it. But I'm not.
Hmm.
I don't think Milo was successful though. I don't. I talked with the people. None of the people involved with GamerGate seem to like him. Um, at least today, right? In the year 2024, nobody likes him. Um,
I can say,
now,
yeah. I mean,
yeah, no, but he's also there's a whole host of reasons for that, right? One is the pedo
sure.
comments. One is he's also like anti-gamer now, or
Mhm.
like pro Comics Code Authority. He's also like anti-free speech now and stuff. Christian nationalists. Um,
Yeah,
pray the gay
whole bunch of
away.
shit.
Yeah, a whole bunch of stuff. A whole bunch of
Uh,
stuff. Like there's a whole bunch of reasons people don't like him now. But also even with Chris Ferguson and Glasgow's survey, like they also asked people not just their self ID, but also on specific issues how they feel,
mm,
and like they're all
sure.
pro universal health care and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Except for affirmative action was the only one I think that they were more conservative on, the Gamergaters. Um,
Yeah.
but he also asked them too where they get their news from, and I think it was 6%. I think it was regularly got their news from Breitbart. Like it doesn't seem like very many people involved with the Gamergate conversation. I know Milo and Breitbart and probably Bannon tried to get people on board, but
Yeah.
I don't think that they were like able to mobilize that and didn't. And they created their whole Breitbart tech thing, and that kind of failed. It seems
Mhm.
like their attempt to capitalize on it didn't wasn't super successful.
I
And
think
the
it's
people
just,
involved
yeah.
didn't vote for Trump, to be clear. Like so we actually have data on this too because I've it's not public yet, but I've interviewed all the people I've interviewed. Well, up except for your late edition, right? But the people I interviewed prior to like 2 months ago, 3 months ago, whatever, they all took a survey, three different ones. They were massive surveys. I asked people a battery of questions, like
Right.
a
I
very
think I did
very
this
long.
survey.
Oh, you did you?
A
Oh,
lot of,
did
yeah,
I send it to you?
a
Okay.
few weeks, about maybe 2 months ago or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you did it. Okay. So like you saw the questions on there, right? I
Yeah.
asked people a battery of questions. I don't have it pulled up, and if I could pull it up if you really want me to.
No, it's okay.
But but
Very long.
people are all over the map in terms of politics. But
Sure.
one of the
Mhm.
questions I ask people is how they're planning on voting in the upcoming election. And now look, the election's in November. Things could change. People could change their minds. All sorts of stuff, right? And relying on people being honest, right?
Mhm.
But out of this, it looks like only 30 to 35%. I think it's like 30% of the people involved are voting for Trump. So it just doesn't
Mhm.
seem like this whole like gamers to vote Trump voting block like ever really materialized, or like GamerGate
No,
ended
maybe
up
not.
moving in a pro-Trump direction.
I'm not sure that gamers are inherently political enough for that to have ever happened fully. But I definitely think I definitely think that also there is there's a lot of people who are probably sort of right wing on certain very specific to this conversation issues, but not all the other issues. Right? Like affirmative action, like you mentioned, right?
Mhm.
That's one, but maybe they want universal health care and gay marriage and everything else, right? Politics are super complicated, and like the culture that we live in makes them even more complicated, right? So like that's one reason why the conversation that on social media is so infuriating, because it's really hard to actually speak with nuance about all of these issues, because you say, well, I'm opposed to like puberty blockers. Well, maybe you're opposed to that because of your the science involved, and you're worried about the kids. But a lot of people take that as you being deeply transphobic, and I think that my point of it moving to the right is not that it necessarily became a right wing movement entirely, but it was definitely pushed that direction, and that became a lot of the focus. A lot of issues that are important to right wingers became the focus, like um, feminism and whatnot. So I think it's complicated, and I haven't done the studies or anything. This is my observation of where things went, and like what are the remaining vestiges of Gamergate, like Kotaku and Action on Reddit and whatnot, right?
Well,
And
that
there's
is
a lot
more.
of
That's more. I don't know about conservative. Like it probably is more conservative, but it's
it's more
more
conservative.
anti SJW.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's maybe where the distinction is. What is conservative versus what is anti-SJW? I think there's a conservative bent to anti-SJW, but it doesn't necessarily mean you are conservative. Hell, maybe you're just you're a
Well,
libertarian, and
like
some people would say, well,
this
libertarians are
is where
conservative, but
this is where like the
yeah,
left and the right like kind of fall because like um and this is something like I just transcribed part of Hassio's interview and he talks about this. But like people like disagree with like the social justice warriors like for like a wide variety of reasons. And like
sure,
some of them
yeah,
are social conservatives, right? They're like, you know what, I don't like gay people or whatever, right? And so that's like the reason they
sure,
don't like them. But then like there's also people who are libertarian or like liberal and they believe in equality of opportunity, they believe in freedom of speech, these like principles they have. And you also have like far left people and they don't like them because they're ignoring the class analysis and they're only
yeah,
focused on the skin color analysis.
identity, yeah,
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 and they're ignoring the others. So there's all these people like disagree with the wokes. Like I think that like it's probably better to say that, and maybe you disagree. Push back on me if you do. But I think like the GamerGate stuff was more like the woke people versus like everybody else almost. Like everybody else, whether you're conservative, libertarian, liberal, or even like a moderate progressive. We had a lot of people like that in
mhm,
GamerGate too, or even like the socialists and communists who don't like the wokeness for other reasons. Like they all disagree with the woke people, but for different reasons. But I think that like
yeah, yeah.
that's
I
it's
think
it's
that's
sort of
very true. Hmm.
yeah, that's sort of how I saw it.
I
But
It's very much an anti-SJW, anti-woke. That would be the unifying factor, whether people are on the left or the right or whatever weird thing. I just think that still, even with all of that being said, that the early days of Gamergate versus where it moved to, I think it definitely moved a little to the right. Now, how far it moved to the right, I don't know, but that's just my observation. And again, like after a little while of me being part of this and watching this, I did sort of la 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 la. It was a very stressful time. Like it was very heated and it got very ugly and it was just at a certain point I was just like, yeah, okay, I'm done with all of this. I'm going to go focus on my family and playing video games and all that. And for actually, I think for a few years I really stopped or really dialed back a lot of my sort of cultural writing, about this kind of stuff. So I probably am not nearly as tuned into this as someone like Brad Glasgow, Chris Ferguson, so on and so forth.
okay, and you're entitled to your viewpoint like that. That's interesting. You and I think Koretsky actually, Michael Koretsky.
Yep. No.
Oh,
Well,
he
I
ran
probably
he
have heard of
ran
him, but
AirPlay, SVG
okay.
AirPlay.
Yeah, no.
Okay. Well,
No.
when I interviewed him, he thinks that it moved in a more right wing direction as well.
Yeah.
So you're not alone in that.
But I would say that the other thing to add to that, again, I think I kind of brushed on this a little bit, but the intervening years between 2014 and 2024 also saw a lot of the broader culture move in a left wing direction in terms of like how much of the woke influence, right, was now coming into games, into movies, right? You see it all over the place, into boardrooms, into the military, and so every reaction has a counter reaction, right? So things that are you perceive as something is moving right, well, maybe it's not actually moving that far to the right. Everything else is moving to the left. Very complicated. So
So
it's
you talk about woke. We can talk about this. I want to ask you about the bring it back to the gamers are dead stuff. But um,
yeah, yeah.
how much of the GamerGate conversation do you think was this woke stuff versus about ethics versus about censorship versus about artistic freedom versus like, or how much of it or I know that they kind of mingle together, right? Because like
Yeah,
the people engaging in the censorship are like the woke people. Not always, but like generally speaking, right? That was like kind of the case back then. Um,
right.
so like they all kind of mix together, but how much of it do you think it is of Gamergate was of the conversation of the movement, whatever you want to call it, was a social justice or culture war issue?
I mean, I think it was all a culture war issue. Just it took different shapes within the culture war. Right. So early on, it was about this ethics in journalism, right? That was like what everyone was starting to get upset about, and then it was also obviously right at the same time about censorship because no one was allowed to talk about it. So all these forum posts are taken down, um, and then of course, then you so in order, right? Then you have all the game journalists writing the gamers are dead stuff, and then you have the backlash against that, and so it's really more like a that in the cartoon where they have the gunpowder to the dynamite barrels. Like it's like a series of those. I don't know that it's one more than the other. Like certain people, weeks later, would be popping up on Twitter with like ethics and game journalism stuff. Even though I felt like the story had moved so far past that in a lot of ways, to the reaction to the reaction to the reaction. So it's hard to pin down what I that's why I say it's more of like it was more of like a cultural moment, a culture war moment, um rather than any one of those things.
Okay.
I honestly, like, I don't even think I think a lot of people were like very vocal about ethics in game journalism, but I think that was just a product of how pissed off people were, game journalists at that time, right? It wasn't even so much about ethics. It was even more about like what dicks game journalists are, right? Like, like since the Mass Effect thing, and probably before then, when I wasn't even part of any of this, like how many times can game journalists, and now I see it in TV with like, with like a show like The Acolyte or whatever. How often can the media say that everyone's just a fake fan or a troll or a bigot or any of these things, and that their opinions don't matter and their views don't matter, and they're not needed? I mean, these are the people who are literally buying the products that make this whole industry work, right? So I think there was a lot of built up anger, and and so I think that was more fundamental to Gamergate existing, the big bang of Gamergate happening, than really deep seated concerns with ethics in game journalism. And I would say that, like, there's a reason we don't even hear about ethics in game journalism all that much anymore. I don't think it's because journalists have become far more ethical or anything. I just think that the cultural issues have been the ones that have stuck around, right? More than any question of ethics. I mean, I can't remember the last time I even heard that phrase.
Well, I I think, and I don't think I'm alone in that. I think a lot of the people I've interviewed too, some of them at least held this view that like games journalism kind of died. Because it
Hmm,
got replaced by YouTube and Twitch and Kick and all these streamers and YouTubers and
sure.
content creators, that they sort of replaced the games journalists, and people I think are more happy with that arrangement because they feel like, well, one, they can choose who they want to follow. It's not like, oh, Kotaku's review. It's okay, here's my favorite creator and here's their
Hmm.
review of the game or their gameplay footage or whatever the heck, right? and people seem to like that more, and they also trust like these people more, for better or worse, right?
Well, and I'm not sure they should because ethics in YouTube or whatever is a whole minefield as well, right? I think that the difference is that they have that face-to-face connection with those creators, and so even though like YouTube creators have far fewer ethical guidelines, uh, people trust somebody who they connect with. And the games press really didn't do a very good job of trying to connect with people either. You know, that's a huge part of it. Whether games journalism is dead, I don't know. Like, I'm still sort of a games journalist, and I still get many millions of hits a month. So
Okay,
I
so
don't think I'm
it's
dead.
well, we have a whole section on games journalism. I want to ask you. Well, but before that, let's talk about the gamers are dead articles, okay?
Yeah,
Uh,
let's do it.
do you
My
consider
favorite.
yourself a gamer? And if so, what does that mean to you?
Um, it's funny because like with self-identity, I grew up playing video games since, since our old black and white Macintosh. So even before I had an NES. But I've played games my whole life, and I never even thought of that word like I'm a gamer until people started mentioning that word. It's kind of like I watch movies my whole life, and I never thought of myself as like a movie watcher. But yeah, I'm definitely a gamer. I play games every day. Um, and what does it mean to me? Not a lot. Like it's a hobby, and I have a lot of hobbies. It's like, what does reading books mean to me? What does watching TV shows mean to me? It's like it's what I love to do. So it means that I get to fill my life with the stuff I love. But as an identity, I try not to like shape my identity around the things I love too much because I mean, not because of anything, but I certainly see that when people identify too much with the things they love, they start to lose themselves in those things. So I just like to have a wide range of interests, and gaming is definitely one of my favorite things to do. So
Oh, people who have a wide range of interests are the most interesting people. That's what I was recently
I
told
think so.
by Archon actually.
Oh
You
yeah,
know Alexander Macris?
I do. Yeah.
I interviewed
Yep,
him.
we talked back in the GamerGate days.
What do you think of him?
Yeah. Oh boy, I haven't thought about him in years. Seems like a nice guy. A little controversial at times, but at the time, and again, I've really not have crossed paths with him in years, but at the time, he seemed like a smart dude who pushed back against some of the excesses that we were seeing at the time, and yeah, I liked him.
Okay.
Yeah.
On
I don't know what he's
August,
doing now. I mean, for all I know, now he's like killing puppies on live stream, so I can't really speak
I
to
don't
him
think
now.
so.
I don't think so.
You
But
can
yeah.
watch my interview with him. He still has some
Okay.
controversial opinions, but like
Yeah,
he's free
I'm
speech.
not
He's allowed
surprised.
to have those opinions.
Absolutely.
Seemed like a nice guy, respectful. Big on civility. He thinks that that's important.
Mm,
I
I
agree.
agree. I think
I
civility is
agree.
very important. I think that's one of the things that made Gamergate so intolerable for me after a while is it was just so nasty. And there's a lot of nastiness all around, I wouldn't pin it on any one group or the other. There was just a lot of it. A lot of it just from anonymous people too, and it was very exhausting for me. Like I do much better in this kind of format, talking with people or like, when I talked with Total Biscuit back then about it, that was all very nice and civil. And then when it would get ugly, it just like that's stress. Like I feel so much stress. So it's just
Yeah, civility's important. People should be able to have conversations with one another without screaming and yelling and cussing
mm,
people out and calling them
exactly.
names and ist and a phobe and whatever, right?
I 100% agree.
On August 28th, 2014, 10 competing publications all published articles in the same day calling for an end to the game into the gamer identity. These 10 articles were followed by 9 additional articles on other mostly gaming sites over the next few days. Do you have any thoughts on these articles?
I wrote about it at the time. That was one of the main things I wrote about. First of all, how did that go? I How did that go? Are gamers dead? Doesn't seem to be. I thought okay. So we know for a fact that there was like the game journalists group, right? I know
Game
that
Journal
for a fact.
Pros. That's a question later too.
Yeah, I know because I was told by some of them that I was blacklisted on that list, and um, of course I've been a persona non grata in the gaming journalism business since I started writing about games. So, what do I think about that? I think I think that the reason media in general is dying is because a lot of people don't have their own fucking opinions and they just parrot the opinions of other people. And you have an echo chamber that is insufferable and boring. And we see it still today. And you wonder why all these publications are shutting down, not just within gaming, but across the whole sphere. And it's only gotten worse because people just march in more and more lockstep every single year, right, towing the same line. And that was what was happening then. I don't even think it was a conspiracy. I just think one person wrote one article and then like a whole bunch of other people were like, hell yeah, we like that. We want to be cool like that person. We're going to say what they said and have no original thought whatsoever, but then they'll like us because so much of that is being liked by your people in your group, right? So much of that is social signaling. So much of that is just this idea that, oh, and I think backed by the idea that they are on the right side, right? They're self-righteous. So I thought it was hilarious at the time. I also was like, what are you guys doing? This is going to make things worse. Like, calm down. You're pouring gasoline on a bonfire. Like, how, like, you're either extraordinarily stupid or maybe you're drunk. I don't know. But it was quite extraordinary to see it happen, that many happen at the same time. But you've seen it many other times. Same thing with gamers are entitled during Mass Effect. Same thing with, even more recently with, the what would well there was like I must have seen like 8 articles saying that Hades 2 characters were sexy and like horny and stuff and like, but then the Stellar Blade was somehow a bunch of articles saying it was bad and not good sexy, and I'm like, what? Why is everyone saying the same thing about these games? Like, it's so, I don't know. I think that's another reason why YouTube blew up and YouTubers, because not every YouTuber is saying the same thing. There's not like, I mean, there are. Obviously, there's a lot of YouTubers who just like imitate other YouTubers, but the ones that rise up have distinct personalities and distinct viewpoints, and they're not just parroting,
Well, I don't
I
know if
mean,
that's
it
I don't
definitely
know if that's
happens.
true.
But I would say that why the certain ones get popular enough is that they have at least their own personalities. Maybe they have the same views, but they have their own personalities.
Sure,
I don't
yeah.
know. I don't watch YouTube.
So
Well, I watch a little YouTube. I have my favorites.
it's interesting you talked about social signaling too, because like I actually talked about that with Alexander Macris, unironically,
Mm,
and we talked about it because Destiny recently has been talking about this a lot, and he's basically working on this idea of how people change their mind, what sort of things, how people think about issues and how they change their mind. He's like a whole manifesto he's working on regarding this,
mm,
and one of the things that he's come to believe is that a lot of it is this social pressure and the social connections that you have, and
mhm.
that that basically people take into account. Well, I guess it's sort of natural, makes sense. Like you think about it in your own life. I do it in my own interviews to some extent. I try not to, I guess, but it is sort of like a social signal or social virtue signal almost, where it's like, okay, look, I have to take into account the interests of X group of people or Y group of people, or else they'll get upset with me, or I don't want to demonize this group of people unfairly, or whatever. And it can be like good to have that
Sure.
stop and think for a second, like, okay, wait a second, maybe I shouldn't make that joke about the dead soldiers or about black people or
Right.
whatever, right? And like
Yeah.
which I don't think like humor should be off limits if you're a comedian,
Sure.
but like if you're like an ordinary person or like if you're like doing what I do, right? You're talking about things on a YouTube channel, a stream, a journalist, whatever. Having that second thought, like, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't put this in the article, or maybe I should reword
Yeah.
this so it's more sensitive or whatever, right?
Oh yeah.
How much
It's a
of
good
that
instinct. Yeah.
how much of yeah, there can be positive aspects to it too, but also it
Mhm.
can be negative, where people demonize other people, where they seem to think like, oh, this person's the out group. So I don't
Right.
even like know. Like, so let's say like we don't have to name names, but like this is someone you really don't like. You can't name names if you want to. It's good content. But let's say there's someone you don't like and you don't know that much about them really. You just kind of don't like them because like you perceive them as being in like the other camp. And
Right.
so like now you're going to like ascribe a constellation of beliefs to them,
Mhm.
which may or may not be accurate, and they're probably going to do the same thing to you. They're going to
Sure.
ascribe their thing, so they know like, okay, you're let's say you're liberal, right? Like, oh, or let's say progressive, even. Let's say you're progressive, and so like they immediately assume like, okay, well now I know your views on abortion, on guns, on immigration, on trans healthcare, on puberty blockers, on or whatever, right?
Mhm.
That might that could all be wrong, but like they're assuming that because they know this thing about you and they put you in an out group, or you're in an in group and they kind of do like the inverse of that, perhaps.
Hmm. Hmm. No, it's very true. Yeah, I think when you have a useful term, I say useful, but a term like gamer in the context of this discussion, it becomes this term that does exactly that, where you can put all the bad qualities that you imagine for these incel basement dwellers, neckbeards, whatever. Um, you can you could say, well, because they have all these qualities that are vices or whatever, imperfections, flaws, because they represent so many bad things, then we can say whatever we want about them. And by doing so, we will also then appeal to all the people who are on our side, whether those are readers or other game journalists. And even though obviously that's just stereotypes, right? Like you're just trucking in stereotypes. But I think that's what was happening then, and I think it happened to some degree on both sides. Like I think a lot of people assume that all game journalists are, you know, SJWs and corrupt and all this other stuff. Whereas I would say that like the majority of people working at game publications are like pretty normal people. Like they're just gamers. A lot of them just, you know, writing guides and, you know, doing not very glamorous work. I think that you have a very small group of game journalists actually who are very politically motivated and very like, you know, the SJW or whatever, the woke. I think that that maybe has grown because more and more people have felt at least pressured to act like they're that they believe those things, or they're afraid. I think a lot of people are very afraid that they'll never get published, or they're not going to have a job in the in media if they don't, if they, you know, if they push back on a lot of this stuff. And it is a very difficult thing because like that's one reason why you virtue signal, right? You're saying to your other people at all these places that, you know, where your colleagues are, like, hey, I'm part of the group, like don't fire me, publish my article. So that's, you know, and that's exactly why someone like me is effectively blacklisted, and I could never publish anything at Polygon or Kotaku or Eurogamer or any of those places, despite being pretty left wing on all the same issues. I just don't like how they approach them. So
Well, let's talk about the blacklisting. So you say that you're blacklisted. What's the best evidence you have of this, and what do you mean specifically?
I don't know exactly because I haven't gotten really details, but um, I was told by a game journalist who I won't name, just because it was a private correspondence, but someone who was on that list, that like I am pretty much like on the blacklist. What that means, I don't know. Like I'm not part of the cool kids club, is what it means.
Well, there is probably almost certainly a blacklist. I've talked with Liana Kersner. She says that she feels like she's been blacklisted for
She's
sure.
probably definitely
And well, she
blacklisted. Yeah,
yeah, they don't like her at all.
yeah,
And then also, I wish I could say name, but he won't go on the record. But there's another journalist who wrote about GamerGate, and he refuses to do an interview with me because he's terrified, and he says that his whole like life and career has been ruined by this. He's been blacklisted because he reported on it fairly. Um,
yeah,
so,
yeah,
but yeah,
yeah. I mean, it's
I think it's cowardly to be fair that you don't come forward. So I think it's
well,
yeah.
I think a lot of people are. You know, I've been messaged by people, both on the developer side and in game journalism, where they're just like I don't know, like I wrote about, you know, I'll write about Chris Avallone's when he was accused of sexual assault, and then when he won his court case, and I covered all of that, and I covered it basically saying like I don't think we can take Twitter accusations that have no evidence and no, you know, all this. I don't think we should be taking these as gospel truth when there's counter stories and counter evidence that shows that this isn't the case. Like we should treat this with caution. We should treat this as something to be investigated, not just to make our opinions up. A lot of people are like, how do you like, how do you get away with it? How do you get away with writing about this stuff? Like, because you just can't. Like most people can't write about this without getting in big trouble. I guess I can because I'm very cautious with how I approach most of it. And because I think I probably just get so much traffic that I'm valuable, and the more valuable than I am with getting, I think that if I'd covered these issues with less sobriety and more uh, fervor or extremism, I probably wouldn't have my job. But as it stands, um, I forget the question.
All right. Well, so it's about you being blacklisted. But so, what do you
Oh yeah,
think
yeah.
of? Obviously, there does seem to be this blacklist, and obviously these people do have like an ideology. A lot of them do, like especially like Kotaku. Um, is like obviously the standout. Seems like their entire organization is built around trying to be like the pro woke media outlet, which is like fine, I guess, as long as they're honest, but they're not. They they lie and misrepresent things all the time. Um,
Again, I'd say it's great to have lots of different ideologies representative. I mean, I don't think it's wrong to be woke. Like, I just think they have bad ideas. But I'm glad they have them so that I can argue with them about it, right? Like,
well, you
same with
could,
like
but they don't want to argue. Like that's the
they
problem, right?
no,
That
they don't. That's true.
But see, like, so what do we think of this? Like you say, how bad is games journalism in terms of like this ideological infestation, if you want to call it that or whatever?
It's well beyond game journalism. It's all journalism now. It's totally, totally, totally captured by wokeism. It's absolutely, other than like, the Associated Press, or like where they're just writing straight news articles. Boom, boom, this happened. Um, every outlet that's not a conservative outlet is now dominated by woke ideology.
What's
Absolutely 100. That's why they hate YouTube. That's why they hate Substack. That's why they hate people like me, because I'm not a right winger, but I don't buy their bullshit. So, and of course, it's going to vary from publication to publication. There's going to be much more radical ones, but I would say that the mainstream journalism is now fully under the that ideology, whether they believe it or not. Right? Whether the individual journalists are actually woke or not, that is the ruling ideology in media today.
okay?
It wasn't in 2014.
What's the best evidence you have of this so you can walk it through for the reader?
All of the publications shutting down because nobody likes this shit. Um, I would just say that if you go on social media, if I mean, there's been so many stories, which I don't know if I remember offhand, but like, what was it? Was it the New York Times or the Washington Post? They published an article about the protests, and it was a senator, I think, that was writing about how they should bring in the National Guard or something. It was an op-ed piece that
The
the
New York
editor had to then
Times, yeah.
okay, then he had to resign after this. Over just publishing an opinion piece from a national leader, right? That and we've seen a lot of infighting with journalists, and just it's been. I should have all these links and stuff, but I don't have them with me. Um, and you just look at, again, I would say like something like with the GamerGate articles, the gamers are dead. Everyone has been echoing each other's opinions for years now, and over the intervening 10 years, I would say that it's actually you have an even more. There's even less debate around this stuff. Like, if you don't agree on certain specific issues, especially around gender and race, you are considered a horrible, horrible person. And so it's like you you just don't see disagreement, because the cancel culture right now is much, much worse. And cancel culture mostly applies to people in your own tribe, right? So if a journalist at either Polygon or the Washington Post comes out and says, and starts talking about like how trans athletes shouldn't be allowed to compete against each other, or puberty blockers, or any of that stuff, I mean, they'll be dogpiled to hell by their colleagues. So people just don't anymore, right? People don't. They just avoid these subjects because it's just too risky. Like, there isn't a free discourse, and so then the only people you hear that from, are people on the other side. So then the debate remains between the conservative outlets and everything else. But we don't have, I don't know, I feel like at 10, 12, 15 years ago, there was a lot more like online. You could go online and people have a wide array of varying opinions. And now it seems much less common in the mainstream, at least.
Okay. Now I do, maybe if you disagree, push back on me for sure. I feel like the Overton window has really opened back up in recent years, especially with Trump losing, and I don't know if maybe COVID played some role in that, but I also think like the wokeness stuff is on the decline, and that's sort of like anti-America. That's partly there's a whole bunch of different like factors that probably like are leading to this, but I feel like
Yeah.
the Overton window's opened back up, and like there's more of like a liberal moment now where people are reclaiming the left has reclaimed patriotism, like not the crazy far left like Hassan Piker crowd, but like the ordinary
Uh-huh.
left, like the.
Maybe.
But I don't
Well,
know.
Trump's wait until Trump's president
Well,
in
well,
a few
if
months and
if
see
he
what happens
wins, all
then.
bets are off, right? I think we're. Who knows what's gonna
Yeah.
happen then?
Sorry. Yeah, no, and so I'm kind of like bracing myself. I don't know. Has it opened up? I don't know.
Well,
I haven't paid enough attention.
I'm an activist in left wing politics,
Yeah.
kind of, and like I'm a GamerGate supporter. So like I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Like
No. Yeah.
I feel like it's opened up a fair amount.
It's
But
hard
I'm
because
also
like
in a
I
bubble too,
look
right?
at
I'm in
the
the streamer world land bubble.
right, right, and there you might have a lot more diversity of opinion. Um, I mean, where I see the left recently are all the campus protests over Israel, which, I empathize with this horrible situation, but I see a lot of, again, that very like lockstep opinions, and it seems to be very like you can't. I don't know. It's
No,
tricky.
what the
Actually, the
woke
Israel thing
still
is,
exists, right? Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And like
It
the
might
but
change.
but it's the thing is, yeah, they definitely still exist. It's like I think the hidden. Have you feel like the hidden tribe study?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so it's a big study that was done, and basically like they put progressive activists, they called them, at like 8% of the population, um,
Mm.
and these are like the people who are well, it's a little bit more caveated than that. Like you could, but basically, let's say 8% of the population is like basically anti-free speech, anti-pluralism, from a left-wing perspective, and like that also exists from the right too. But this like 8% like it still exists and like they're on college campuses like shutting down free speech and stuff,
Yeah.
and like saying some crazy stuff sometimes, which that's their free speech as long as they're not being violent or hurting other people or disrupting classes or anything like that. They're allowed to
But
protest peacefully. um,
I
but
would say that
they still
8%,
exist, but that 8% I think is like their power is declining for sure. I think that
but
people.
it's grown. It grew so much, though. Of course, it had to retract, right? I read an interesting article about how, the university system just couldn't keep everybody in these fields anymore. Like historically, you get a degree in, and you've been studying anti-racism or gender studies. You get a job in the university, but then there just weren't any more jobs. So a lot of these people then are out getting jobs in journalism, getting jobs in government, getting jobs elsewhere. And so a lot of that ideology, then helped by the internet, the pipeline of the internet, just went everywhere really fast all at once, right? Got into, corporate boardrooms, got into the military, went all over media like crazy. Now, that happened. It can't sustain itself because it's unpopular. So of course it's going to decline. Is it declining now? Like, yeah, probably it is. But I mean, as with everything, like it's going to take time. Like that capture in journalism, for instance, will probably last longer than in other sectors, right? Because journalism is all about communication. So everyone's in that. They're always talking. They're always communicating ideas, and so you have to watch yourself more, right, than somebody working in a IBM or something.
All right, so I want to
So
ask, how much time do you have? Because we still have a lot of questions to go. I'm having fun with it if you are, but.
yeah, I got maybe 6:30, so maybe my time, so maybe a little under 2 hours.
Oh, so yeah, we got plenty of time. We're good. We
Yeah,
can probably knock this out. Do you need to use restroom or break or anything?
not yet. I'll let you know. Yeah,
Okay.
I'll just go like this.
All right. So, what do you think about games journalism?
Hmm. Many years ago, I wrote a post about this video game that had never been released. And it was being released on the original like N64 disc or something by a company who was not the original company, but they were going to release this game. And I had written a post about this, talking about how, wow, it's like still going to cost like $60. This is a really old game, and it's been only available on emulators ever since because it's never been released, which I linked to. And I was flooded on Twitter by angry game journalists calling for me to be fired for supporting theft and piracy, including quite a few pretty prominent game journalists. I was at the hospital with my 2-year-old at the time who had pneumonia, being told by a huge part of my fellow game journalists that I should lose my job over supporting the theft of a game that had never been released for 40 years or something, whatever, not the 40, 30 years. And that shaped my opinion of game journalists pretty strongly, I'm not going to lie. It was so mean-spirited and so unfair, especially since a lot of them later wrote their own pieces talking about emulators and whatnot. Pretty hypocritical. And that being said, there's obviously, when I go to events and I meet game journalists, a lot of them are super, super nice people. A lot of them are, working for free, volunteering. They love games. A lot of them are really genuinely just gamers who are excited to write about games. So while I think that a lot of the higher, more vocal, more like higher profile game journalists, a lot of them are assholes. But a lot of them are just like hardworking people trying to get by, who have a passion for video games. A lot of them are probably more. I write about TV and movies a lot more than I write about games, honestly. So a lot of them are more passionate about video games than I am, like, because I've sort of moved to making gaming more of a hobby rather than my central coverage. But it just, it's always the most vocal that define something, right? That form our opinion of it. And unfortunately, there are a lot of high profile game journalists over the years that are just pretty toxic people in a lot of ways. So.
All right. Now, I'm 1,000%, and if they don't have the game available for purchase, like 1,000%, it's fine to do whatever, get it any way you want. I don't care.
That's how you preserve a lot of games, right?
Exactly.
I mean, emulation is going to be one of the last lines of defense for preserving games. So,
yeah, 1,000%.
I think it's pretty important, and I don't think that's theft. So,
how responsive?
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. Go ahead.
How responsive to calls for reform do you think the Games Press was during GamerGate?
In some ways, I think they were surprisingly responsive. Like a lot of games outlets refreshed their ethics policies and made it a point to emphasize those. And I think there was some self-searching, as far as like individuals within the press, I think a lot of them just doubled down and became more hostile to gamers. But I think a lot of the actual outlets, and I think maybe that was editorial or maybe that was management that was like, we need to do something about this. This is a bad impression. And that may be why we haven't heard that much about ethics in game journalism, because there was this big move to actually do something about it. Or maybe there weren't that many ethical failures to begin with that go beyond the normal problems with access media. But I don't work at a gaming outlet, so I don't know.
Yeah, it's possible things got better. I think, well, the FTC probably forced them to get better, right? They can't.
They might have, yeah.
They can't do their undisclosed sponsorships and stuff anymore. It's illegal. But also there are still a lot of problems, I think, with games journalism. Like if you look at or at least I don't know about a lot, but there's definitely some, because they did lie about the Sweet Baby Inc. controversy that happened recently. Did you follow that at all?
Oh, I made a video about it where I was like, I'm too old for this shit, man. Like, I can't do another GamerGate. People are like, it's GamerGate 2.0. And I'm like, you sound excited about that. And it sounds terrible. I followed it some. They're a consulting agency that tries to assist game developers in making their games more DEI friendly, basically. And there was a Steam curation group that was listing all their games publicly so that people could see what games they had worked on, and then they tried to get that shut down. And then, of course, when you try to shut something down, it's the age-old Streisand effect, right? It just blows up even bigger, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I've looked into it. I haven't followed it super closely, and I think just like with GamerGate, like it's probably kind of being exaggerated to some degree. Like some of these games that are being worked on by Sweet Baby Inc. are already games that are trying to do that diversity thing. So like if games want to do that, I don't care. It's up to the game developers, right? I'm happy
Right.
with them to do whatever
If
they
they want to
want.
if they want to hire these companies, that's their choice. Not now.
That's their choice.
I will say
If you
though,
don't want to buy their games, that's your choice, right?
exactly. I will
So
say that I don't think that I wouldn't trust Sweet Baby Inc. to do a good job. I wouldn't hire them for my games, but that's their developer's choice.
most consulting firms, I would say, are probably a waste of money when you could just be hiring more people to work on your game. I
And
don't know.
if you do want to hire consultants, like hire people who are actual experts, like hire people who are historians or
Mm-hmm.
they're part
100%.
part of a
Yeah.
culture or something, right? Like if you're like, oh, what are these like white Canadian people going to know about woke white Canadian people, right? They call themselves white settlers on their website.
Oh my
What do
gosh.
they
Do they
un-
really call themselves
they
that?
do their parent company does Baby Ghosts,
Okay.
so
So
they call themselves white settlers. I swear to God, it's true. It's
why do so many of these people sound like parodies of themselves? It's
right.
hilarious.
But like, what are they gonna know about writing a game about like an African character, right? Like, I would hire like a Kenyan historian or something. They're gonna help you way
Oh,
more than
yeah.
what this woke Canadian's gonna do.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that the Tales of Kanzera Zhao got dragged into all of this. I really I'm friends with Abubakar Salim, and I think he's a wonderful human being, and I know that that game was deeply personal to him because it was about his father passing and him grappling with that. I wish that it hadn't had anything to do with the Sweet Baby Inc. stuff, because it really, I love to see more games that are like African folklore, right? Like when I want more diversity, I'm like, we don't just need a game with like every racial color in it. We need games that are about African folklore. We need games that are about, you know, all these different cultures, Native American culture. Like I like the diversity in stories, not just a checkbox,
Yeah, I agree.
So
Now, we'll say I'm not sure if you followed though what happened after the Sweet Baby controversy. So the media did lie about it. They basically they didn't talk about how Cabrutus, the Steam Group creator, got harassed by
mm,
Sweet Baby employees. They didn't talk about that at all in their articles. They completely left that out on purpose, actually. Some
yeah.
of them even admit to this. Um, but then afterwards, Cabrutus, he had all this goodwill. He was riding high for a moment there, and then he decided to throw it all away. He's actually threatening me right now. Do you know that?
No, no,
He's
I didn't know. I haven't
terrified
heard any of this.
because he ended up lying about Yi Zhang, a game developer. Or sorry, she's a game developer. She's a community manager for Heart Machine. Uh, and a friend of mine now. But he ended up lying about her and spreading lies that
Mm,
her company, her organization Gumbo, is engaged in illegal hiring practices and hiring people based on race, which is completely made up. They don't even hire people. It's a non-profit group that doesn't hire. It has 0 employees. So like, this
oh,
idea that they're
yeah, well,
hiring
that makes
people
that
based on
hard.
race is completely idiotic. But
uh,
anyway, he lied about
that
this,
sucks.
and then a bunch of people, including myself, were like, "Hey, you should apologize and retract this." But I guess he had too much of an ego or is too proud.
Mm,
He couldn't do it. You talked earlier about how people, when they're confronted on their mistakes, they don't correct them. Um,
yes, it's
well,
very true.
he's in that camp. He decided to double
Mm,
down, and then he said, "If you talk about this and tell people about it, I'm going to sue you." Well, that's what his
oh boy.
PR person said. His PR person told
Oh
me that,
boy.
and I said, "Okay, well, I'm going to keep talking about it. So fuck you." And I'm going to talk about it right now.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah. Well, like, yeah, that's, it just goes to show that, like, you know, and often in these situations, there aren't really heroes or villains. There's just people who make terrible, terrible decisions, like that, like trying to shut people down with lawsuits or threats or leaving out the truth or directly lying. Like, um, damn, I didn't hear any of that. No, I haven't followed the fallout of Sweet Baby Inc. stuff very closely.
that's basically it. There's not been much more specifically about that Sweet Baby, at least. Well, actually, I think there was something where another company went under or something. I haven't looked into it though, so I
Hmm.
can't say anything.
There, oh, yeah. I think there's been various stories, but also people attribute too much. Like, okay, did this company have to go under or have to do layoffs or whatever because of Sweet Baby Inc.,
Right? Was it that or
or
something
was
else?
it,
Who knows? Right? I
it's
don't know.
the industry is really tough. Oftentimes, after a game is released, there are layoffs because now there's, unless you're working on another game right away, it's hard to sustain a full staff. So it's who knows.
Were there any games journalism reforms you would have liked to have seen happen?
Mm, I don't know. I mean, not really reforms, I guess. Attitude changes, maybe. um, I think that it's such a volatile field, media. Like, what I'd like to see change in media in general is just people being more willing to be open and have diverse viewpoints. And you can't do that through reforms, right? You can't really have actual like meaningful reforms that help open people's minds, right? As far as ethics in game journalism, I don't know. Like, I just think that if they followed the guidelines that are already around, then there's no problem, because those are pretty straightforward and solid guidelines, about what you can accept, what you can't accept. I honestly don't think, like, I think too much is placed, like too much value is put on like reviews and things like that. I just don't think reviews are as important to gaming outlets as people think they are. Guides make way more money, for instance. So I don't know. I honestly, I guess I haven't really given it much thought in a long time, so I'm not necessarily that equipped to answer that.
Okay. If you were the editor-in-chief of a gaming website and some of your employees were accused of ethical violations, what would you have done?
I mean, depends on the accusation. I mean, I guess that's so contextually dependent. Who is accusing them? What's the ethical violation? I mean, I would investigate it. I would probably, I guess, get our legal department to look into it. I'm assuming that I have a legal department to use, and then depending on if they were actually in violation, then they'd probably lose their jobs, or they wouldn't, and some statement would have to come out explaining it. I think transparency is really important, like, not necessarily while you're in the middle of an investigation, because obviously you have to withhold things, but once you've done it, then you should be really transparent. Like, this is what we found, this is what we didn't find, this is...
Do you think
another, I just to add to this, I think during Gamergate, the feeling that everything was so closed off, that no one was being transparent, that it was all, I think that really added fuel to the fire. So anyways.
Do you think there's still a role for good games journalism in the world? And if so, what does that look like to you?
I honestly wish there was more of a role for games journalism. I wish there was the money for more investigative journalism, which just doesn't exist unless you're at a huge, like, if you're the New York Times or something, you can do investigative journalism. Like, maybe 0.1% of the journalists there can do that. There's almost no investigative journalism for video games, but when it does happen, I think it's super useful to find out about, bad practices at a game developer. And there have been some great articles. I would. The problem with media is it's so hard to pay for something like that, because it doesn't usually, it's much cheaper to pay for lots of, like traffic driving things that are easy and quick, guides and quick news pieces and all that. So if I could have any change, it would just be that somehow we had the money to pay for good in-depth investigative games journalism and investigative journalism across the industry, across all industries, and that journalism wasn't always sort of, I mean, people don't read as much anymore, right? And that's always on the decline. So game journalism is always fighting, or all journalism is really always fighting this losing battle to just the realities of the universe. And it would be great if there was some way to change that, like a magic wand, but I don't know. I don't know that there is. I think it just gets worse and worse is what happens. Like, for instance, I could never do an investigative I couldn't do investigative journalism, because the way I'm paid based on traffic would mean that I would have to, I would have to devote like weeks of time to working on an investigative report, during which I would make no money at all, right? So that would and so that's just the trick with so many people, is that they aren't funded. There just isn't funding for any kind of real in-depth stuff. And then the industry is so opaque. Like, you try to talk to people in video games, and it is just like a wall of PR. It's like people in game companies are terrified to talk to the press because publishers are just monsters. So that's that. I would love to see more of that, but there's not the money for it, and that impenetrable wall of the video game industry is, it's a very few journalists have enough like sources and time and funding to actually do any real investigative work.
Yeah, I think that's important, but this is investigative work, and I can tell you, there's not a lot of money in it.
No, but you
It's
can't speak.
unfortunate.
You're not NC, but for it to become something meaningful, there would have to be money, right? Like not everyone's going to do what you're doing, right? Because they just can't.
Right.
And because and it's like, you want to fix education, you got to pay teachers more. Well, but some teachers just love to do it. Yeah, but if you want to get more good teachers, they're going to have to be paid more. And and there's just not the money for that, or it doesn't go to that. So
Some GamerGate supporters believe that pressuring advertisers to pull out would be a good way to convince gaming publications to initiate ethical reforms. What do you think of this strategy?
it did. I mean, they did to some degree at the time. I think that boycotts are a very valid and useful way to handle problems. So if there's a company like a public, I would worry that they're just doing it because they don't like the politics of a place. Like, oh, let's boycott Kotaku because they're SJWs. I don't think that's the right approach, because that's almost like, let's not let them have their opinions because we disagree with them, and I don't really care for that. But if there are actual ethical issues at play and you want to try to pressure advertisers, I think go for it. Yeah.
In September 2014, it was revealed that nearly 150 games journalists from competing publications were in a mailing group called Game Journo Pros. What did you think of
Was
this
there that many?
revelation? Yeah.
I wasn't surprised by it. I wondered I wondered if it was responsible for like dogpiling on people that were deemed bad. Like in the story I told you earlier about the game that I linked to the emulator. Like, were there people in that list who were like, look what Erik Kain just posted, let's fucking get him, because that sure makes sense.
Well, we have the logs of the list, so
Oh,
I don't recall that being there, but I haven't read all of it, so
sure. But I mean,
if it wasn't there,
even if
knows?
it wasn't that list, how many how many like private Slacks or whatever, where people are in there and they're talking, like, or just, I mean, it was public, so it could have just been like, oh, I see this guy on Twitter saying this thing to such and such, I'm going to go in there too. Let's have a bloodbath. I mean, whatever, they're allowed to have their stupid list, I think. I guess I thought it's kind of funny, honestly. Like it seems like when I talk about how people just want to be part of the cool kids club, this seems like evidence of that, right? I understand talking with colleagues. Like, I have colleagues I have messaged, Slacks or whatever with, and that 150 in one group, like, you really are, like, you just are going to organize parties at all the little out of the E3 and shit. Like, what are we doing here? It's funny.
They did do a lot of bad stuff in the list. Like, well, I don't know, they did some bad stuff for sure. Like trying to pressure Greg Tito into censoring people on the escapist forums, and then also
that shit's bad.
Yeah,
for sure.
And then blacklisting people too, like Alistair Pinsoff, and there was a game developer they blacklisted as well. So like they did a lot of bad stuff, but like I don't think in principle it's necessarily bad to have like a professional, like, hey, look, we're all in the same industry together. But if you're a journalist, you should probably be more careful, right? Like, it's different, I guess, if you're having like, well, is it different? Like if you're having like let's say you're a carny, right? And you have a list of an email list of a bunch of carnies. People work at carnivals.
This is absurd, but yes, okay.
Right, sure. Like, if you're a journalist, you're serving the public interest in theory. So like you probably do have like a higher degree of carefulness at approaching it. You should, at least, I think.
I think that, like, I'm sure that it started innocently, and I'm sure a lot of people joined it with no bad intentions and thought, oh, this will be a useful way to pick up on what's going on. It's like why people get on Twitter. Like, for a lot of it is just to like be up to speed on things. But once you start using that list as a cudgel to mete out judgment or whatever, then I think that becomes a very, very different kind of list, right? And a very nefarious. And I'm sure that a lot of people in that list didn't have any part in that. I suspect, I haven't read the logs, I suspect that there were ringleaders and there were certain people who were more active in that process than others.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
But yeah, I mean, but that's human nature also, right? Once you have that secret club, you start doing the secret like mastermind shit, right? Like it's not surprising. It's still very juvenile to me. Like I guess I still find it fun, even though they were doing bad things. I find the bad things they were doing so preposterously silly, like that they would care enough. Just speaks volumes about the kind of like mentalities and immaturity and pettiness of these people.
You don't have a lot of love for your former colleagues or your current colleagues to some extent, right?
It depends, right? Like I said, I've met lots of other game journalists. There's so many that I've never heard of that have not made any, that have not ever written these things, that just do hard work and love games. So I have nothing but respect for the vast majority of games journalists. But there's enough that are shitheels. So again, it's like the loudest voices. What was the guy that? I'm so bad with names sometimes. It's terrible. That's why I have to look things up constantly. But the Hogwarts Legacy developer, he was a producer on that game.
Oh, Troy Levitt. I interviewed him.
Troy Levitt, yeah. And I covered that, right? And there were all these people that right off they found his YouTube channel and they immediately assumed, this is the word that a lot of them love, that he was a grifter, right? He was a right-wing grifter. He was probably, must be because of this fact, a threat to women at his workplace, probably all these assumptions. People wrote whole articles, especially at thegamer.com, which I find to be one of the deepest cesspools of the internet. All these articles about like what a terrible person he must be. And none of them actually watched any of his videos. None of them reached out to talk with him about anything. They just made a vast array of assumptions about him based on like some tweets and then ran with that shit. And I just found it just appalling. Not only professionally appalling because it goes against everything we're supposed to do as journalists, but like appalling on just a deep fundamental level of like, you don't treat people that way. And I just feel like there's a lot
of fucked over bad.
Yeah, he did. I mean, and it didn't really like fuck his life over because he was retiring from his gig and all that. But I mean, it shows you how easily this group of vultures can like congregate and try to destroy someone's life. And they try it and they succeed sometimes. And I find that to be a really repugnant way to be. You don't, at least do a little bit of homework, like at least do some research. This is just a private guy too. It's not like he's a senator or like an executive. He's not Bobby Kotick or something, right? Like do a little thinking here, that instinct we were talking about earlier where you think, oh, wait a minute, it's just a guy. Like I don't really know that much about him. Maybe before I write an article about this person that's a random, basically anonymous producer on this game, maybe I should talk to him first. I don't know, crazy thought. So yeah, those kinds of game journalists I have nothing but scorn and derision for. But the majority of game journalists, it's just like in any group, right? In any group, the majority of people are pretty cool, and then there are a few really bad apples, and they're the ones you hear from the most. So
okay. Yeah, Troy Levitt's cool. Doesn't seem to be a
really nice guy.
At all. A really nice guy. He actually comments on my videos sometimes, actually, so you might comment on this.
Yeah, I just could not. I knew his name. I forget my own name sometimes. So
so there's two big games journalism stories recently. One of which is Kotaku Australia is closing shop. So you have any thoughts on this?
I know a lot of people didn't realize there was a Kotaku Australia, so I'm not exactly surprised. I am always sad when a publication shuts down. So I'm sad that Kotaku Australia is shutting down. I think that we are all less for same with layoffs at a game studio, same with any of that. Like we are all a little less when that happens, and it's unfortunate. At the same time, there's a reason that these things are happening. I think a lot of it is big structural things like the shift in the way people consume their media. And I think that it's also when everyone's saying the same thing, you don't need 20 publications to say it. If 20 publications are going to publish the same article, you don't need 20 publications. I thought you just need one. Now, people want to, if gaming press wants to survive, they need to start saying different things and having different opinions and having different takes and different approaches to this shit. And that's how you survive. You don't survive you don't have 20 shops on the block all selling the same product. It doesn't make any sense. So you have to have you have to be able to sell your shit. And the game journalism is not doing that very well. Honestly, that's why I don't even mind some of, like, if you're like some of, like, Lee Alexander was a big voice in Gamergate, and I don't like her personally, but she was a good writer, and she had opinions that were her own. She actually, I think, a lot of people piggybacked on her opinions. So you can have the Lee Alexander.
Well,
yeah, that was hers. That was her shit, right?
Yeah.
Okay, she made a unique argument, and then everybody copied her. Okay, well, you only need her then. You don't need all those other fuckers, right? You just need her. And I'm happy that someone was saying that, all right, so that somebody else can say, no, this is wrong. You know, you need you need a wide array of opinions. And Kotaku Australia, like, what differentiated them from just Kotaku? Like, why do we need both? I don't know. But I'm again, like, it sucks. Journalism's hard. It's shitty. So, you know, it sucks to see it go.
There is an indie developer scene in Australia, and like if you covered that and did a good job, I don't have a problem with that. You know, there's obviously enough interest in it, or there theoretically is, right? But I don't know if not super familiar with Kotaku Australia. I'm not a big fan of Kotaku regular. But the only thing I know about Kotaku Australia is they actually went to a GamerGate meetup. They sent one of their reporters to go to a GamerGate meetup, GG in Melbourne in Australia, and he didn't even write an article about it. The guy didn't. But 10 years later, almost, it was like literally this year, a few months ago, he ended up tweeting about him going to this meetup. And he misrepresented it and was like saying like, oh, like these GamerGaters were monsters or something. I don't have the exact quote, but it's like, wait a second. He misrepresented events because like actually it was like a diverse group of people that were hanging out at the meetup.
Yeah.
And I interviewed people who were there, but like he's tweeting out like, oh yeah, I met these GamerGate losers or whatever at this meetup, but he didn't even write an article about it. And he's
very strange.
Yeah, that's the only thing I know about Kotaku Australia. That they're closed. So.
Yeah, I think I've read a couple things there over the years, but nothing leaps out at me. I mean, maybe they had some great stuff. I don't know. I mean, you're right. Australia has its own unique stuff to cover, but I suppose it's going to be hard to have any outlets focused on a single country, especially one that's not the United States or Japan.
So I do want to ask you too about the other gaming news, which is IGN has purchased the Gamer Network, Rock Paper Shotgun, VG 24/7, Eurogamer, GamesIndustry.biz, and Dicebreaker as well on the tabletop side, and then they also they have partial ownership in Nintendo Life as well in the Foundry. What do you think of this consolidation, these mergers?
I think sort of the same thing as my last opinion, which is, well, consolidation and mergers are always scary because you get too much of the influence, too much of the money, too much of everything focused in one organization, right? That's why we have laws against monopolies. And but I wonder, are all these publications saying enough things that are different from one another to really count? Like, does it matter? Like, are they? I would say like certain things, like Eurogamer's breakdown of what's the channel that does all the tech breakdowns?
Oh, much.
Digital Foundry. They do good work. But really, like, are these publications offering enough unique takes? Do they have enough stellar writing? Do they have something that makes them special? Are they saying different things, or are they all essentially sort of little copies of each other, and they're all now just going to be under IGN, and IGN's going to lay off a whole bunch of people, and it's a shitty situation? but there is an alternative, and where the game's press is not capitalizing on the alternative, which is again more diverse viewpoints and more open-minded coverage of everything. So this is kind of what happens. This is just what I mean. It's always worrisome to see the consolidation, but I don't know. Like, does it matter? Does it matter if everyone's saying the same thing anyways?
It's interesting that you call them out in both answers about basically they're all just saying the same thing. Doesn't really matter. I think that's an interesting point too. Like, why would you go to these sites if they're not going to have original stories, original opinion, original review, whatever it happens to be? If it's just the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there is some. Like, I'm sure there's some. I'm not like trying to shit on all the writers at all these places. I'm sure there's some great reviewers and all that. I just wonder if overall, in the big scheme of things, if there's enough to differentiate them to make that really that big of a deal. You know, were they having a big debate about Stellar Blade between these different publications? Was there?
Not really, but
they all just saying the same thing.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, that's exactly that's the problem, right? They don't they all think alike.
Right, and that's not very marketable. That's not a product people want to buy over and over again, right?
Well, maybe we'll see a correction, but you don't seem optimistic.
No.
Like, do you want new publications popping up, or?
I think that again, it's the media shift, towards YouTube, towards TikTok, towards video in general, towards smaller, shorter, easier digestible. Which on the one hand, like YouTube, you see some great video essays, you see some amazing content, but will YouTube suffer the same exact fate and everything moves to these 1 minute, 2 minute videos? Just people's attention spans just.
Well, humanity's fucked if that's the case. Probably, right?
which is generally my viewpoint on everything. Humanity is fucked, and what are you gonna do?
Yeah, well, I know people in real life, and they're like, "Oh, I get my news from TikTok or from like YouTube Shorts," and I'm like, "What?"
And you just want to throw yourself off a building.
What? Yeah. Like you're learning about like politics from a fucking 30-second YouTube video or short video or 1 minute short video. I'm like, I'm losing it, man. I'm losing my mind. I don't.
I mean, that's the decline, right? From like reading really well researched, extensive journalism with, to like blogging, to just fucking tweeting and TikTok and, and I mean, again, there's some great YouTube stuff, right? There's some amazing writers on YouTube that put these video essays together and are entertaining and all that. But I mean, and they're very popular, right? Those are actually very popular, but I just wonder, like, what is the trajectory? What is the trend? What do we see? Do we keep on moving? Is that always towards idiocracy? So,
well,
I don't know.
So I'm guilty, right? I put out YouTube Shorts and TikToks, like very rarely. I occasionally put them out, but I don't think it's like a completely I don't think there's zero value necessarily in it, because whatever. It's giving us a bite-sized. The idea for me at least is it's giving you a bite-sized part of the conversation, and then if you want to see the full conversation, you can click on the full conversation and see the full discussion.
Oh yeah, and that's the way to grow your channel and all that, as they say. Like,
but when people are talking about getting their politics or their news from this, I am concerned.
At least they're getting news. I mean, that's better than nothing. A lot of people don't get news at all. I don't know.
maybe. All right. That's a whole sell me on that idea, Eric. Sell me on that idea. Is it better that you get your news from TikTok, or is it better that you get your news from nowhere?
That you get from I guess that really depends on the TikTok channel. I mean, I could see like a TikTok channel with like
it does
really good quality, like 1 minute, like here's something that happened and here's why it's important, and then link to something else. That you could do it, but no, probably a lot of it's like garbage, and people would be better off. I mean, I think people are way too political now. Like, overall, I think there's one thing about being informed, but now I feel like everything's become this like screeching political nightmare where everyone's just, everyone's like identifies like for instance, when I was in high school back in the good old days, and there was a presidential election, like nobody talked about it at all. But now, with my kids are in class, like people are like on the sides, they're the Trump supporters, there's the Biden supporters, and I'm just like, really? Like, it seems like, but it's like people are too political, and people bring that political mentality into everything, right? Into their
Well,
games,
that's
into their
true. That's true.
movies, and all that. I find it very exhausting
Well, and
because a lot of people don't know what the fuck they're talking about. So
I don't think it's maybe I don't know what you think of this, but I don't think it's like illegitimate to have politics in a game. You know, like I think that
oh
a lot
no,
of it's a work of art. You can explore different themes and elements. Bo, I personally. I do see what you're saying. And it's like not even good politics. It's like shitty like culture war shit. That's all that's what most of the politics people are
yeah,
obsessed with today is. It seems.
yeah.
It's not
Well,
like
like if
actual
you're like
in-depth
having a
policy analysis or like I don't know,
or
covering like the
like
war in Ukraine or anything important.
yeah, you like it's like there's games that delve into political ideas, right, about big issues or historical events, or the idea of freedom versus authoritarianism, or all these things that are very political, and that's great. I think it's when politics, when it's like so on the nose that it's like you're just clearly you're just referencing something that just happened last year, and now it's going to be dated so quickly, and it just takes, it's like, or like in TV shows where suddenly they're, the whole TV show is about one thing, and then suddenly they're talking about Trump. It's like, even if I agree with what they say, it's jarring. You have to be like a good satire show like South Park to like, that's like really good at like focusing on the politics of the day to do that. So
Well, we're still in games journalists, but I do want to pick your brain on politics later for sure. Do you have any thoughts on deep freeze?
I don't know what that is. I
Okay,
don't remember. It
deepfreeze.it.
sounds familiar.
The Bone Golem's website, where GamerGate supporters created this website
Oh,
to create a
yeah.
list of ethical violations that they've uncovered and
Right, right.
keep
I
track
remember that
of
now.
if they're issuing
Hmm.
corrections, stuff like that. Do you have any thoughts on like people making websites like this to keep track of stuff, inform the
I mean,
public?
I think it's, I think like transparency and all that is great. I think that a website like that tracks with a neutral, unbiased. They're not just targeting one publication or
Mhm.
targeting one group. I think that can be very useful. I think that the risk is always that you're going to have something that is just really just another political cudgel or tool to. And that's fine. I mean, if you want to do that, that's fine. I don't find it as valuable. I don't know enough about it. I remember it now. I remember it being referenced a lot back in the day. I just forgot what it was, but
Hey, the
I
website's
mean,
still up.
yeah,
Go there right
yeah.
now.
I think I've gone to it before, but yeah. I mean, I think having more open knowledge, more access to information is always, even if it's difficult, I think it's always a net good. You know.
Okay. I agree, and obviously, they're not without bias necessarily. I think they try. Bone Golem tried to be fair with it, but he has a disclosure on there too that websites that were critical of GamerGate might be subject to asymmetrical bias. So he's even like upfront saying, "Hey, look, we're not trying to be biased, but just be aware that because
Mhm.
of who we're paying attention to, and because of these websites don't like GamerGate, that we could potentially be a bias here." Which I think it's good that he disclosed that too.
Yeah, I think that is good.
In August 2015, Michael Koretsky, a regional director for the Society of Professional Journalists, hosted the SPJ Airplay conference. The idea of the conference was to have journalistic ethics experts meet with Gamergate supporters to discuss their concerns about games journalism and the way the media covered Gamergate. The second half of the conference was interrupted by bomb threats, forcing the convention center to be evacuated. Do you have any thoughts on this event?
Who all was in that again?
So it was Mark Seb, Ash Gow, Kathy Young, Christina Hoff Summers, Milo Yiannopoulos, who we talked about earlier, um,
Uh-huh.
Alan Bakari, and then on the panelists on the other side, of the journalist side, it was Lynn Walsh, Rin Laforme, and Derek Smart, who's a game developer,
Right.
3000
Remember
AD,
Derek Smart? Yeah, I
and
know Derek Smart. I've talked with him. I
Koretsky,
like it. I like him.
yeah, Koretsky was the moderator.
Hmm. I watched some of that. I think, yeah, I remember. I remember. Okay, my thoughts on it being interrupted by the bomb threat, or just on the whole
Oh, the
thing.
whole event, but you can talk about the bomb threat too if you want. It's not that interesting
Oh,
though.
Yeah, no, not really. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's great. I think that's exactly what kind of the stuff that should have been happening then. Which is just more discussion with people that had platforms and podiums and to actually have a voice that could be heard. And um, I think that if right off the bat that discussion had been allowed, uh, we wouldn't have even had to get to that place. So uh, I don't remember the details of it, but I think it was an overall positive and good idea.
Okay. All right. Why do you think the media largely didn't cover SBJ Airplay?
I think that overall, like coverage of everything GamerGate related was just like why you don't touch a hot like
Well,
you don't
they
stick your finger in an outlet. um, yeah, I mean, I think that at that point there was a lot of there were very few people trying to cover the whole thing from a neutral perspective, and everyone else was covering it with ideological motives. So if you had ideological motives that you didn't want to present Gamergate in any kind of reasonable light, you were just not going to cover it unless you could get something juicy out of it. Um, I think by the time that happened, I had largely stepped back from covering it just because it was um, stressful and not worth it for me from a psychological perspective. So I don't remember if I wrote about that or not, but I think for a lot of people it was either like you don't want to write about Gamergate because you don't want to get like shit from anybody, and for other people it was probably like, well, we're not going to cover something that's viewed largely as positive about Gamergaters because we think they're the devil, and we have to maintain our narrative that this is a anti female harassment campaign.
Yeah, well, they don't want to give my project any attention. Now, that could change. Like, they might decide to do a hit piece or something at some point. But right now, I've reached out to pretty much all the major gaming journalism publications. None
Yeah,
of them will touch the story at all.
yeah, no, I'm
And
not surprised.
Kotaku actually replied. They even openly said they're not going to. Well, they said they're not interested. Um,
Yeah.
but who knows? They might decide to do a hit piece at some point. So I wouldn't hold my breath. But right now, they just want to starve it. It seems. Don't
Mm,
give attention.
that seems, yeah, and also I suppose like it is Gamergate. I mean, it did happen a long time ago, so I mean, a lot of these game journalists were just in their training pants back then. But yeah, I don't know. Honestly, I think that for a lot of people, it was just kind of like, yeah, we don't want to touch this with 10-foot pole. For other people, it was like, well, if there's not an angle to make this about how gamers should be dead and whatever, then we're not going to write about it. So
Did you see the South by Southwest Safe Point panel or my panels at Arch Anime and Natsucon?
mm-mm,
Okay. Have you seen the recently released Airplay documentary?
mm-mm.
Yeah.
I didn't
Well,
even hear about it. Yeah,
yeah, it's worth checking out. Part one focuses on games journalism. Everyone agrees. Even the anti-Gamergate people say it's good for part one.
hmm.
But part two is more on like what do we think of the other stuff, and like that's where people
Okay,
have disagreements.
interesting. I'll have to look
Yeah.
it up. That does sound interesting. Yeah,
Yeah, I've interviewed the creator for this project, and we've also done like a watch party of part one together because that's part one's free,
yeah.
but part two you have to pay for.
Okay, interesting.
Um, do you have any thoughts on the Kunkel Awards?
Don't know what those are.
Awards created by the Society of Professional Journalists after Airplay to uh, to promote good games journalism
Oh,
by giving
I
like
did hear about those.
incentivizing
Yeah,
people to do a good job.
I don't hold much value in awards, so I don't know. I think it's not a bad idea. Like, definitely promote good journalism, and um, but I don't know. Awards are such a popularity contest most of the time. That's why I don't know about them really. Uh,
Do you think it works as like an incentive for like people who want to get a certain award because they think it's like good for their career and they're like, you know what, I'm gonna do my best. I'm gonna try and aim for this. If I get it, phenomenal. If I don't, I tried. But do people does that
maybe.
have
I
any
mean, I think
effect on behavior? You think or no?
so. This is an award for ethics, like ethical
excellence in games journalism.
excellence is good. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's great. I just think like how often do those awards end up becoming about the popular people that are in charge of, that ultimately always bubble up to to be in charge of them, and like the Academy Awards or the Game Awards or whatever, right? Like it's just kind of a popularity contest. I'm very cynical about awards. Maybe it does. I mean, I was nominated for a Shorty Award back during GamerGate, which was cool. I don't know if I deserved it, but I didn't win. I don't think I deserved to win. But I've never really, like awards for.
Excuse me.
I think, I mean, it is cool, I guess, to win an award. I think I just find that like journalism is so cliquey, and like just like Hollywood's cliquey. Like how much validity is there in those awards versus just like doing like.
Well, I do trust the SPJ. Generally speaking, I think that they do like a generally pretty good job. But
Yeah.
I don't know what their exact methodology was for picking winners and losers. I don't know if it was like voted on by community or like what, or they had a panel or
Right.
who's on the panel. I have no idea.
Right.
So before we get into creative freedom, are you aware that there's a conference coming up about GamerGate in theory in September?
I think I heard something.
Okay, so yeah,
I'm not.
it's in Detroit.
Hmm.
Lawrence Technological University is hosting a conference about GamerGate. Except I've actually interviewed two of the organizers, Paul Jostin and Stephen Meldal. Paul seems like he's a bit more neutral, a bit more open to hearing us out a little bit. Stephen was very hostile to GamerGate. He's even tweeted about it, about how Activision Blizzard needs to condemn GamerGate in 2020. He's saying this. I don't. Maybe in his head it was still going on in 2020. I don't know. But they're hosting this conference, but they only invited, or the only people going, it seems so far, are the anti-Gamergate people. And a lot of people have expressed concern about this and like, hey, look, we want to have a diverse array of perspectives. And they heard me out. They agreed to sit down with an interview with me and hear out critiques of their one-sided perspective so far. And it doesn't seem like they're going to be adding diversity, despite people who live in that area actually like Brad Wardell, the CEO of Stardock, him and one of his employees, a woman who's a project lead for his company. They both wanted to go and speak there, but they weren't invited at all, and there doesn't look like they're going to be adding diversity. Is this event something that you'd be interested in covering or investigating at all? This academic conference supposedly investigating what happened during Gamergate or what they can learn from it, they say.
It doesn't sound like it'll be particularly useful if they're only bringing in people from one side. So I don't know. I mean, I'll look into it more, but I don't know that I would cover it.
It's called Alt F4, and it's in Detroit. So, all right. So creative freedom. Some Gamergate supporters say they got involved to advocate for what they saw as artistic freedom, the right of artists to make art that they want. The art they want without fear or censorship or shoddy localizations. What did you think of this aspect of the conversation?
So this idea that, I guess, can you say that all one more time?
So some Gamergate supporters say that they got involved to advocate for what they saw as artistic freedom, the right of artists to make the art that they want without fear or censorship or shoddy localizations. What did you think of this aspect of the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great, and I think my only cynicism there is that I feel like people have a very difficult time sorting their own biases. Okay, I guess like looking at Stellar Blade, it's very hard to tell if some of the changes made to Stellar Blade really were what the developer wanted or if it was a result of pressure, right? And the creator of Stellar Blade said that they made some of these updates to the skins because that's what they actually wanted from the get-go, but a lot of people don't believe them and they think this was censorship. So where do you draw the line there, right? Like you want artistic freedom, but if the developer's saying that's what they wanted, do you believe them, or do you keep pushing this idea that no, it's being censorship and we need to free Stellar Blade or whatever. And that goes to any kind of game. Like, obviously, I agree 100% that we shouldn't be censoring games. And I think a lot of the localization stuff that goes beyond just translating something to make it make sense culturally, I think is way overboard. So I support that in principle, absolutely. But also, I've seen a lot of people who are, who get really, really angry at some of these developers who are making games that, like Sweet Baby Inc., right? That's the developer's absolute 100% right to use Sweet Baby Inc. to make a game that's full of DEI stuff and
well, that's not
whatever they want.
GamerGate complaining, though. To be clear, like that's
no, but I mean it's connected, like it's theoretically, right, and like spirit, right. So, but my point being, like, do we really support freedom, or are we only supporting the kind of freedom that we want? And that's a bigger issue that everyone has to sort of look inwardly.
I don't agree with the in spirit thing at all, actually, because I asked the GamerGate people, and only 30% of them think that only about 30% of them think that that the Sweet Baby Inc. stuff is GamerGate too. Most people don't consider it to be that.
Well, I don't think it's GamerGate 2. I mean, people were saying that, but I think that, like, just this idea, like your question of supporting, creative freedom, I think that that everyone has this weird line where they support creative freedom until, like, something rubs them the wrong way, and then they're like, "This is terrible."
And sure, yeah.
So that's mostly what I'm just saying.
Yeah. What do you think about the argument that video games can cause or reinforce sexist attitudes?
I think that there is some truth to say that the media we consume and the people we surround ourselves with helps shape us, right? But just like with video games creating violence, I don't think that video games create sexism. Like, you don't, like, see a sexy woman in a video game and suddenly you just objectify all women. I think that's nonsense. Because I think people have reasoning faculties and so much else that goes into their formation as a human being. But I would say, like, people who consume way too much porn might have a really distorted view on sex, right? But I don't think that video games are actively creating sexist or violent people.
All right. Some political activists believe that using social media campaigns to demand artists change artistic elements of their work was a good thing, like #ChangeTheCover. Some people thought that this was going too far or could have a chilling effect on artists. Do you have any thoughts on this tactic, on things like change the cover?
I mean, I think it can definitely go too far, right? It can result in. I mean, if you're demanding change, I mean, that's kind of the opposite of wanting creative freedom, right? So I think you run the risk of I mean, I think it's perfectly fine to ask for something, but you can take it too far, I guess, if that makes sense.
Well, the next question is, where do you draw the line between criticism and a censorship campaign?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that, like, criticism is usually thoughtful, right? Criticism is explanatory. You say, this, I dislike this, here's why. Here's what could be better, and I'm offering this to you freely. You don't have to accept it. The line is when you start saying you must change this or else, like, we're going to badger you, we're going to go after you. Then it's not criticism anymore. Then it's not like talking anymore. It's aggressive. And I would say that's where you draw the line. When it becomes something that's like, and I'm not even saying that it's necessarily a hard line. I think it's probably pretty fuzzy. But I know as someone personally who writes a lot of criticism, I'm never, like, demanding change. I'm just suggesting it. So,
do you have any thoughts on, I know you mentioned localization earlier, but do you have any thoughts on the removal of content from some foreign games when they're localized?
Yeah, I don't think that this is a passion for me like it is for some people, because I'm not, like, really into, like, a lot of foreign games. And the ones that I am generally don't have this issue, like Dark Souls and Elden Ring and stuff, have not been hit by really bad localization. Partly because they're just so cryptic and whatnot. But yeah, I think that generally you should try to keep with any adaptation, and I think localization is a form of adaptation, right? It's not just translation; it's adaptation. It's that's why we even have localization from British content, right? We may not understand what this word in British English is, so it has to be changed, or this context has to be slightly changed. But if you're fundamentally changing the meaning of it, then you're not really localizing anymore. Like you're editorializing, and I think that that's where you should draw the line when it comes to localization. Like even if you find it offensive, it's not really your job as a localizer to de-offensive. Like unless you've been given that directive by the publisher, and they're like, "Hey, some of this stuff might be considered offensive to American audiences. We would like you to change it." Well, then that's your job, and you've been told to do that by the people paying you. Otherwise, I think you should leave it alone, and you should make as faithful an adaptation as you possibly can.
All right. Do you want to talk about your political views or philosophy?
I describe myself as a eclectic politically. My views are subject to change. I generally am a strong free speech guy. I believe in a lot of left wing ideas, like we need a strong safety net. We need universal health care. I think we need huge reforms to police and prisons to make this. It was just, I think that if you wanted to really strip it out, as one of my friends said, cruelty is the worst thing. And I think that politically, I would like to see our policies focused on ways to make the world a less cruel place for people to live. Uh, Not necessarily easier, but less cruel and demeaning. And I think my political philosophy is that in a lot of ways, having a free exchange of ideas and a society free from the threat of violence can go a long ways in that regard. So I would say that I'm in a lot of ways a left-leaning libertarian.
Okay. Well, what do you think of the upcoming election?
I think we're fucked. I think we shouldn't. How do we have two like 80-year-olds running against each other? It's just it's an atrocity. I mean, one of them clearly should probably be in a nursing home, and the other one should probably be in prison. So I think it's a terrible, terrible tragedy for America, and I don't know that any good will come of it, no matter what happens.
Well, I just hosted a panel last night on if Joe Biden should drop out. Do you think he should?
I don't think he ever should have run again. It's so hard to say politically whether he should because it's so unprecedented. Like, what will that do? Will that create such a like? How do they pick a new person? Like, does it mean Kamala Harris, or is there going to be like this 11th hour runoff? Like, so it's really hard to
Well,
say
yeah,
with my level of uncertainty. It's hard for me to say would that be a smart political move, but he's clearly just he's the only thing that gives me any comfort about Biden is that at least he's got pretty savvy people working for him that are probably doing the job for him at this point. Whereas Trump, I think, is just a crony. Like he's just going to have a bunch of cronies, and it, he's just. I personally have nothing but. I detest Trump, so I think we're in real trouble if Trump is reelected. But Biden is clearly not fit to be president of the United States, so we're fucked.
yeah. I I don't know. He seems to not he seems to have indicated that he's probably not going to drop out. At
Yes,
least for now.
I don't think he will.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah, which I think is unfortunate because I look. I don't know if someone else can do a better job. I think would do a better job beating Trump, which is all that I really care about. Because
right.
I also view Trump as a massive threat, a
Massive
problem.
threat. Yes,
Yes.
yes.
But look, I'd take my chances with Whitmer or Harris even. I
Sure.
don't know, but I don't like Newsom. Newsom's like
No, he's sort of like American Psycho, right? Like
yeah,
he
I don't
seems
know.
very
Yeah, well,
odd.
he like he's one. If it's true that he's anti-gun, like he's anti assault weapon, which he's the governor of California. I wouldn't be shocked if he were necessarily. But if he's anti-gun, I think that's going to hurt him a bit. And then also too, he doesn't seem to be ethical, right? The French Laundry, he's shutting down the state, and then he's going to have private dinner parties with his donors and his friends, which doesn't seem to
Right.
be like a very good thing for a leader to be doing.
Yeah. 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 I mean. that's the real trick. Like, who would take Biden's place? How does that work with just a couple months to go? Like that, like, is it even like logistically possible to get somebody else on the ballot in all the 50 states and with all the, it's a complex, like the way people are actually elected with electors and all that is just, I don't know. I thought he was going to be a transition president. I thought Biden was going to do this for one term and then pass the torch.
Mm-hmm.
They should have
He
had,
should do that.
well, he should. I mean, he should, from just a point of like, what's the responsible thing to do? Yeah. But
Well,
whether that's feasible now, whether
well,
it's too late.
and it's if you think about it from Biden's perspective, he probably, unless he really thinks he can win, right? Maybe he does.
Right.
I hope he does. If he's going for it, he better believe it. But
Yeah.
yeah.
You better sell it.
But like his legacy, if he does get, let's say he beats Trump, or well, either one, his legacy is going to be he lost to Trump, which is going to be like you've destroyed the republic, or
Yeah.
two, it could be he wins and then he dies like 3 months later, and it's like,
Right.
like okay, like that's your legacy. Like your legacy could have been
Yeah.
that you were
You
like
served, like, you did an all right job fixing some of the bullshit we were going through, and you passed it on, and
yeah,
you did the right thing, and we were remembered as like a pretty boring but like
an
decent
elder
guy, and
statesman.
okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, an elder statesman, and good. That would, isn't that enough? You got to be fucking president, man. I
Yeah.
don't know. It's crazy to me. I'm still in shock. I think I can't believe that we're about to have an election. I can't believe that debate. I can believe that debate went the way it did. I knew it would go like that. It's hard to see, It's hard to see where we're at. So
Well, he has had some vigorous moments since then, right? Like the day after.
yeah,
But so,
yeah.
what do you think? Do you think he's cognitively impaired, or do you think that it was just like a really bad night? He says he was sick. That's what his campaign's saying. What he said in the Stephanopoulos interview.
Um, yeah. He said he was like jet lagging and stuff, and like, I don't know. Like, yeah, I'm sure like little things are gonna, at that age, in his state, little things are going to drag you down really fast, and it's going to be a lot harder to be in a debate with Trump. But that doesn't really help his case that much, because you're president, so you're supposed to be like fit and ready for any big thing, like the nuclear war or whatever, right? You can't just be like, oh, well, I was jet lagged, and that's why I couldn't
Well,
handle this
yeah,
crisis. Like, it's just saying, like, that's why we shouldn't have presidents who are in their 80s. Just a crazy
probably a good
thought.
idea. I wouldn't set a hard cap, but like maybe set it so that it's because like because like we could have massive extensions in life expectancy, right? So set it for like
Sure,
5 years below whatever or 10 years below whatever the average death rate is, right? The life
sure.
expectancy. You have to
And then
retire.
you can
Yeah,
change it.
yeah,
Lots of things we should do like that politically, though. Like, we should have expanding seats in the House of Representatives based on
yeah,
population.
absolutely.
Like, we should have all kinds of things that change over time instead of everything just being set in stone forever, even though it makes literally no sense whatsoever. Same thing if there had been an age cap that was like 60. Well, that might not make sense anymore because people are living longer.
Mhm.
So you got to have
Right.
some. Um,
But I'm with you with the House 1,000%, and I want to replace first past the post too with almost any other system would be fine.
yeah, yeah. No, there could be so many better systems. Can we pause this?
Yes,
I
absolutely.
do need to actually use the restroom real fast
Yeah,
and check on my kids real fast, and then yeah, I can go for probably like 45 minutes more. So
cool. I think we
just
can rush through it. I think we can get through.
okay.
Yeah.
I know we're getting on lots of tangents and stuff, which is fun,
Well,
but
no,
I
it's
can
it's
be,
fun. Yeah. All right.
yeah.
Cool. See you in a minute.
All right, I will be right back.
All right, all right. Chat, I am back. Hey. Hey, JT. Not much to watch right now, but probably got another 40 minutes or so, we said. Hopefully we knock it all out by then. We have to finish politics, then interactions with both sides, harassment, media coverage, light items, reflections, and closing questions. So we've got like 7 sections to go. Or like 6.5, I guess. GamerGate the musical. Many such cases, yes. Many such songs and some good stuff. Welcome back.
Thanks. Sorry, I had to deal with my children who need food, and uh,
No.
were harassing me to do that, feed them. So I ordered Mexican delivery.
Oh, nice. What do you go for?
Yeah. They wanted Cafe Rio, so um, despite us having a bunch of really good local Mexican food here, we did that.
No, man.
Yeah.
What do you go for? What's your meal? What do you go for?
Oh, I'm just gonna eat off of theirs this time because they ordered a bunch and I know they won't actually eat it all. But I like to get like if I'm going for like more of the Baja thing, I really like fish tacos. If I'm going for more like Southwestern, I like green chili enchiladas or like chili rellenos. I like to make tacos or slow cooked beef barbacoa personally, or like a slow cooked pork or shredded chicken.
Okay.
That's so much Mexican food, man. I can't pick just one.
No, I understand. Tacos can never go wrong with almost anything Mexican can never go wrong with almost.
Mm,
Yeah.
very true.
All right. Though I don't know about eating like the worm inside the
Oh, the
tequila.
mezcal.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't think I would do that.
I, you'd be lucky to even find one, honestly. But no, I've never done that. It's a bridge too far.
Maybe if I was really drunk, maybe.
Yeah, well, yeah, definitely then. Really drunk.
Really drunk. All right. So, have your politics changed since GamerGate or due to GamerGate?
Not due to Gamergate. My politics, I think, have largely, like I was talking about earlier, while a lot of things have changed on the left, I haven't changed with them. So now, when I talk about left-wing politics, I can sound more conservative. But I feel like my politics have largely stayed the same, which are, pro-gay rights, pro like labor and all that other stuff. But I have a lot of problems with kind of like how the left approaches gender politics, anti-racism. On a theoretical level, I'm with them on a lot of that stuff, but it's all there's just a lot of anti-free speech and a lot of like authoritarianism on the left these days, and a lot of calls for censorship and cancellation. And so for me, I think that I become more resistant. I pushed back more on those things. So maybe that's a change that's happened in the last decade or so, of degree rather than of kind. And I would say that's not because of Gamergate or anything, but because of kind of the larger story that Gamergate is part of.
Okay. Are you okay with gaming sites Sorry if I'm going relatively quick, but we have like
No, you're totally good.
60 more questions to go, probably.
Okay, let's knock them out.
All right. Are you okay with gaming sites criticizing games through a political or religious lens, such as a Marxist, feminist, Christian, or other lens?
Sure. Just be smart about it.
Do you think there can be any do you think there can be any value in analyzing games or other works of art through a political lens?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it can make your critique unique and interesting if you have a unique political lens by which you want to assess something. I read a really great article about Bayonetta a long time ago by a lesbian game. I don't even know if she was game journalist, but she was writing about this, and she talked about how the male gaze critique was bullshit because what about lesbians? What about the creator? Like one of the creators of Bayonetta was a woman, and all this stuff. And I think she brought her own worldview with her ideas on BDSM and queerness and all that stuff to her discussion of Bayonetta in a way that pushed back against a lot of the other left critiques of Bayonetta. And I thought that's really interesting. And I think you could do that with a lot of different political ideologies and whatnot. So,
well, she sounds pretty interesting. Maybe I should be interviewing her.
You should, yeah, maybe. I mean, who knows what she's like now? This is like a 14-year-old article probably now.
Who was this?
I don't remember offhand. I'll look it up and send it to you though.
Okay.
Maybe maybe you can find it now.
Some people say that game. Yeah, if you can find it up. If not, you can send it to me later.
Nah, I'll send it to you later.
I'm also not really adding new people to the project. Well, I make some exceptions occasionally, but
you might just enjoy the article. So
yeah. Some people say that Gamergate was the quote first battle of the culture war unquote. Do you have any thoughts on that framing?
I think if you have no historical context whatsoever, then you would say something like that. Like the culture war has been going on for decades, right? Like the culture war has been going on for longer than that. And the culture war was what led to the Civil War. The culture war is just it's the forever war, right? I mean, what about the civil rights movement? What about, like the political correctness of the 80s, or, all the shit, no, this was just a one more relatively recent culture war battle than that, part of a much, much bigger story.
Did you know the name of my first book was GamerGate First Battle of the Culture War?
See, it's not, though.
But
You're wrong.
well, sure. Well, so yes and no. So I think that cultures are always fighting and changing and debating the norms that exist within that culture. I think that that's probably
Mhm.
normal and healthy and good to some extent. Well, we're way too obsessed with it right now in some cases. Now,
Yes.
but I think that
Yes.
GamerGate was, it might be fair to say, and I don't know, people have different perspectives on this, but it might be fair to say that GamerGate was like the first major like cultural debate about wokeness, quote unquote,
Mm.
about like the great awakening, some people call it, right?
Hmm.
This sort of change in aspects of the left starting around the 2010s.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably true within what's just a newer version of the culture war, right? Because of course there was lots of other versions of culture war between um,
Right.
the right and the left. So
Yeah, all throughout history. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. What do you think of the framing of Gamergate or the reaction to it as being a moral panic?
Hmm. I mean, I think certainly there was, maybe it got a little heated. A moral panic. I don't know, that's more like D&D is satanic, or all these sort of moral panics. I feel like are something that occurs to within a majority population. Like the whole world is suddenly panicking about this, whereas Gamergate was much more niche. Like it was an isolated community that a lot of people didn't even know existed or have any big understanding of. So I don't think I would qualify it that way.
Okay. Miss Sonata in the chat says discourse on political correctness, what they call woke before the term woke has been around for decades. I don't know if like political correctness and wokeness are the same thing necessarily.
No, but they're very much the same species. Like wokeness is a new breed of political correctness. Yeah,
But also, I don't stand by
I
the
would absolutely.
yeah. I don't necessarily stand by the title of my first book. So my 2019 book.
Well,
So
you've got to write a catchy title, and if
yeah.
it's divisive, then you're even better. So.
Well, so I at the time I thought it was like fairly like I don't know if accurate, but like I thought like it could definitely be seen this way as like the first battle of the culture war, but like also like that's what the fuck's a culture war? My book wasn't even about the culture war. Like it talked about it a little bit, but
So it was clickbait, is what you're saying.
well,
You're
I my perception at the time was that, and I guess still, is that GamerGate itself like wasn't a culture war.
Mm.
GamerGate's about ethics, but that at the same, but that because of the way people responded to GamerGate, it turned into a culture war, I guess,
Sure, I can see
more
that.
over time. Or
Complicated,
yeah,
but yeah. Hmm.
yeah. So a little bit more nuanced, I guess. But what do you think of the framing of GamerGate as a battle between those who believe in Enlightenment liberal values and those who don't?
I, it just sounds kind of too simplistic. I think that I steer away and try to not engage in the idea that I am personally some warrior for social justice of any kind, right? Including enlightenment or whatever. Like I don't think that I possess enough knowledge or or can house enough truth to be fighting some noble battle. I don't think that you can especially attribute that to a whole group of people fighting some war. Like, who knows the motives of everyone involved for that? And frankly, the people on the other side may think the same thing, right? That they are defending women, that they are defending equality, right? It's
Oh,
every, like there's always somebody that says that what they're fighting for is good and that justifies all the people
oh,
they kill, right?
to clarify, by Enlightenment liberal, I meant like the values of the Enlightenment.
No, yeah, yeah, I know. I think you could probably say that people on both sides of GamerGate would probably argue that they were in some way fighting for that.
Okay. Did you interact with any pro GamerGate people? What was that like?
Not very much. We did one thing with Total Biscuit and a couple people who were. This was early on, and they weren't really pro. I guess they were more neutral, but I think they maybe were more neutral because they were with me and Total Biscuit. And I don't remember. I can't remember. Was it Greg Tito? Was he one of them? Maybe he was. I think so. Um, actual pro, like. I mean, I wrote stuff about what they wrote. I like to engage in that kind of debate of ideas, but those types of people um, thought I was a monster. So generally, they didn't have much interaction with them.
Did you interact with any anti-GamerGate people, and what was that like?
Oh, wait, so I'm talking about anti-Gamergate people. Did I hear you wrong? I was
Oh,
talking about
I'm asking.
anti-Gamergate people.
Oh, yeah, no. So I'm asking. I was about to ask both. I ask you pro and then answer because you're neutral, right? So
So I was talking about anti-Gamergate people when I just said they thought they didn't like me. Anti-Gamergate people hated me. Pro-Gamergate people generally liked me, and yeah, I interacted with a bunch of them, like Milo, and I probably was just being dyslexic in my answer. I'm sorry. Uh, yeah, I mean Milo and I some random YouTubers whose names I can't remember, and
so
um,
TB was pro, right? He wasn't anti.
shit. Total Biscuit was very much like
He was
me, like
more like
he's more
he
neutral,
was
like
pro but neutral. Like he was pro, but he was like he didn't. He wanted to. Well, he
yeah.
cared about ethics, right? He's well,
Well, yeah,
but most of the so
yeah.
yeah, GamerGate was
He
about
cared
ethics
about
in my opinion. So
ethics, but he also cared about like he wasn't involved or really cared about all the
no, he
personality
didn't want to
stuff.
get
Like
involved in the
he
drama
didn't
and
want to get
stuff.
involved in that. And that I was the same. Like I love Total Biscuit, man. Like what a
Though he
we had lost
did,
a real treasure, you know.
though he
But
did say. Sorry, I cut you off with the total, but go ahead.
no, no, go ahead, go ahead. No,
He
I'm
did.
done.
He did accuse Brianna Wu of being an attention whore, though, or attention seeker. But he
Well,
wasn't wrong. But
I
did you know
mean,
she's been lying about him for years? I found this out the other day. She's been lying about Total Biscuit for years to this day, and well, up until a couple recently, um, s-
that,
claiming
yeah.
claiming that he's transphobic and that he's a
Oh,
harasser and supports harassment and all this stuff. But yeah,
hey,
she
accusations of transphobia come thick and heavy these days. Brianna Wu, I had a long conversation with actually. As a pro, she was one of the pro or anti. See, I'm
she
just
was
kidding.
anti. Yeah.
Anti Gamergators. And we had a long private conversation, and she seemed pretty reasonable during that conversation. But then everything in public, she was just like so different than that, and then ultimately, I think she blocked me or something. But so it was very weird, like the private conversation versus like public persona, and seems pretty inauthentic to me. So yeah, that was probably one of my most in-depth conversations with somebody on the anti-Gamergate side, and I, again, it was just a private conversation. It wasn't on the record or anything like that, and I don't really recall much of what was said, but she seemed fine during that conversation, and then later it was just like, boy, she's just like so unhinged.
Yeah. So I have very weird history with Brianna Wu. Um, like during GamerGate, I didn't really talk to her at all. Um, because she blocked me, I guess, or yeah, I think yeah, she used the auto blocker, right? Um, so I didn't really talk to her at all
Yeah.
during GamerGate, and so my view of her was like basically she's kind of like opportunistic, kind of like throwing this stuff out
Mm-hmm.
there just so she can like get a name for herself. That's my opinion really at the time. And then when I started this project, she sort of like distanced herself from like her woke past. She's now like an anti woke liberal, um, which is kind of like a weird change.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, she's actually she runs like she used to run she used to be involved with Progressive Victory. Now she also runs like a rebellion pack, this super pack she's associated with now. Um she's like a major political figure, kind of.
Hmm.
But uh
Interesting. I'll have to look that up.
so like I'm like, well, she claims to turn over a new leaf. She's not that person anymore. Maybe I'll reach out and build a
Maybe.
bridge, right? So we
I
talked
just
for
remembered also. Oh,
good.
sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh,
No,
we
no.
I'll just say
I,
I'll be brief. We talked for a little bit on like in background, and then we had like one debate because we talked about like the Sweet Baby controversy. It
mm,
was like a friendly discussion really. But I don't think she's like an honest person at all.
yeah.
Like and like
That
even to this day, she
debate.
still stands by. She's friends with a bunch of the GamerGate people. She's like
Hmm.
she'll have GamerGate people on her show all the time, and and
Hmm.
she even considers Hatman, the top moderator of Kotaku in Action, to be a friend of hers, a personal friend.
So
But
strange.
but then she says that Gamergate was about harassment, except for the few good people like Hatman and Short Fatted Taku and Beckett of Crabs and maybe me. I
Huh.
don't know. Probably not me. Um, but it's just like a weird. I just can't. I don't know. I tried to like understand and build a bridge and be empathetic, but like
Yeah.
I feel like you're gonna have to like change your view on this. Apologize really for your past actions. I feel like that's really what's necessary to Total
Yeah.
Biscuit and to the Gamergate people. But
Definitely.
anyway,
That's for
it's her
Total Biscuit.
her life choice.
I was on a HuffPost Live video with her and Frederick Brennan.
Oh yeah. He
I'll
agreed to do it.
send
Well,
you
he
the
was
link.
interested in doing an interview. He didn't agree. He expressed interest, but then we kind of fell out of contact. So
What is Gamergate? Uh, I guess this must be a different source, but yeah, I'll shoot you that in
I think I saw
on
that,
Twitter.
maybe not at the time,
Yeah,
but like at some point over the years, I've definitely seen
it
the
it was
Frederick
so
Brennan.
weird. I was just like, what is happening right now? These people, they just want to yell at each other. That's all. That was funny. Um. Anyways, okay,
All
yeah,
right,
we better move it
all
along
right.
here.
So how could the GamerGate conversation have been more productive?
I think fundamentally just allowing it to be a conversation before it was called Gamergate. Like if they had if all these forums hadn't been shut down, then uh, Andrew Baldwin never would have come up with the hashtag Gamergate.
Adam Baldwin.
Adam Adam Baldwin. Too many Baldwins. I don't know. Adam Baldwin, who I actually had some interactions with then. He was a very nice guy, even though I disagree with him on pretty much everything politically. But like the fact that it just boiled over the way it did and then was given a name, like if it never been called Gamergate in the first place, I don't think it would have ever become what it became. Because you give something a name, and you give it power, and it gives power to everyone who talks about it, right? It's again like being able to label all Gamergaters as something or whatever. But once it had already happened, I mean, I think if everybody had like stopped trying to dunk on each other and actually like had some conversations, some video conversations, some good faith arguments in the press, I think all of that would have helped. I don't know. Who knows though, right?
Do you have any thoughts on Not Your Shield?
Not your shield. What was that again? Remind me.
Well, when women and minorities use this hashtag, because the games press was saying, "Oh, well, everyone who disagrees with us is a white man, and gamers are dead," and there are a bunch of sexist, misogynist harassers, and women and minorities who supported GamerGate were like, "No, that's not true.
Yeah,
You
I
can't
mean,
use us as a shield."
again, yeah. It is sort of the reverse of labeling all gamers as bad. Is saying that that you're defending like these groups. Like it's very condescending, right? To be that's what you see in a lot of wokeness in general is a bunch of highly educated upper middle class white people speaking for minority groups or the downtrodden, and it's very condescending. So
Discussion of GamerGate was widely censored online. You've alluded to this yourself a bit. Why do you think that was?
I think honestly, it's the nature of the the tell all, the Zoe Quinn thing. I think mainly it's because that was something that was viewed as like really personal and quite ugly, and something that a lot of places just didn't want to touch because it was just too personal, right? It's gossip about people who are really, really not very well known. This isn't like Britney Spears, and this is like very, very unknown, not really public figures. So a lot of places were like, we're not gonna allow this. A lot of them, I think, did have good intentions originally, but I think that the problem when you do that again is that when you shut something down like that, you just make it bigger. So
All right, we got 10 harassment/sexism questions.
all right, my
You have what,
favorite.
like 17 minutes, right?
Yeah, about that.
We still have to do the media coverage, light items, reflections, closing questions. Shoot. Do you want to do a part two sometime, or do you want to try and rush through this? It's up to you.
Well, we could probably do a shorter part too. Yeah, I mean that would be
It
fine
would be
by
shorter,
me.
yeah.
Like because this we've covered a lot of ground, and we could just do another like hour and a half segment.
Yeah, I don't think it would take that long because we we're both very verbose people, but
Yeah.
I think we could, yeah, I think we could probably finish harassment and maybe media coverage, and then we'd just have light items, reflections, and closing questions, which is like maybe an extra 25 questions.
Let's see where it goes, and
Okay.
we'll go from there.
All right. Why do you think some people claimed that Gamergate was about harassment or hating women?
I think for several reasons. I think first of all there was some harassment, and so it's easy to focus on that and say, look, it's a, here's something bad that happened. Now you can make everything bad about it, and that sort of leads into the second part, which is that you see this with a lot of things, which is narrative building. There's a lot of narrative building that goes on when people are in a political or some sort of conflict. You have to create a narrative that supports your ideas. So if you can find these bad apples that are engaging in harassment, then you can build a narrative around that makes the whole movement into a harassment movement. Then that's just very convenient, and it makes for something that's easily digestible by people reading about it and easy to communicate. And so that was the most convenient way to frame something that was at its core a very complex and sort of bizarre story, right? That had so many moving pieces and stuff that was just hard. It's much harder to see it and to say, oh, well, you remember like Mass Effect 3 and all the way gamers are feeling about the press and the way that this all built up and all these different factions that are involved. Like, it's much easier to be like, okay, this is actually about harassment. It's rhetoric.
Do you have any thoughts on the studies done on Gamergate and harassment, such as the Women Action Media study, the Newsweek/Brandwatch study, and the Nimbus study?
It's been too long since I've even read about those studies.
Okay. What do you think of the Gamergate Anti-Harassment Patrol? Do you remember this?
Gamer Anti-Harassment Patrol.
It was hashtag Gamergate Harassment Patrol, I think it was, or was it hashtag GG?
So
We can just go on the hashtag and find it right now. Let's see.
were they like going out onto social media to stop harassment or something?
Yeah, that was the idea, that they're going to police
So
the mentions of like Nina Sarkeesian or Zoe Quinn or somebody like that, and like make sure that nobody engages in any harassment or mass report it, encourage other people to do so. Um,
it just feels like people like that forget that there's a block function on Twitter. I don't know. Like,
well, the Gamergate people did it because we were being accused, right? Plus,
oh, okay.
I think a lot of people just don't
I
generally
see
know.
what you mean.
Yeah, Gamergate Harassment Patrol. Put that on hashtag Gamergate Harassment Patrol. It's its own hashtag that was widely used back then, 2014,
Yeah,
2015.
I don't even remember seeing it honestly, but I don't think you can stop harassment on social media by engaging. I think you mainly have to just block people and move on. But
Do you think most Gamergate people did a good job condemning harassment?
I saw lots of condemnations of harassment. I mean, I think it's just one of those things. Like, it's so hard when it's so much of the movement's anonymous and it's organic and not organized, and there's not really, it's just social media. I mean, who the fuck knows who was even harassing, right? Like, other than like if there was some high profile stuff going on, if it's just a bunch of eggheads on Twitter, like, for all we know, like, some of them could be pro Gamergate, but some of them could have just been anti-Gamergaters going on and pretending to be so did people do enough to condemn? I mean, I think there was only so much you could do to condemn, and I saw lots of it, but could there have been more? Probably. I don't know.
You don't have to answer or talk about it, but did you experience any harassment during Gamergate from either side or from third-party trolls?
Probably. I mean, I receive harassment for Walking Dead reviews, so it didn't seem particularly out of the ordinary, other than, yes, at the time there would be some dogpiling that would go on. This mostly happened a bit later, but somehow I mentioned Gamergate. Maybe it was 2016 or something, and I got really dogpiled by a lot of people, like Lee Alexander and a bunch of them, and some crazy person that said I was like the founder of the alt-right, and it just got wild. Which, I mean, like, I didn't know I was the founder of the alt-right. Like, that's crazy. Yeah, like, where a lot of people really, really, really came after me. Do I qualify that as harassment? I'm I'm hesitant to use the word harassment because I feel like that's a little bit different than dogpiling. Like you get dogpiled by a bunch of people who are just like shouting at you. Like it's not like they kept harassing me for weeks or days or weeks or like threatened me. But it's very unpleasant to be dogpiled on Twitter, especially when some of those people are like your professional colleagues. Um, I feel like harassment, there's like a you assume the role of victim if you're saying you're being harassed, and I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like I was speaking something that I believed to be true, and a bunch of people who were very insecure acted very childish in response. I didn't feel like a victim there.
It's well, I'm going to ask you to define harassment later, so I'll be looking forward to that. But no, I mean
Hmm,
it's yeah, it's difficult to define because like I don't know,
it
my
is.
own views have shifted over time. Like for like a while, I was using the view. I was using the. I didn't really have like a definition, like a fixed definition. So I'm like, oh yeah,
Sure.
like that seems like harassment. I don't know. And then
Yeah,
I was like, okay, if it enters real life, right? Like if you're trying to get somebody fired from their job, if you're threatening
yeah.
to kill them or rape them or whatever, right? Something like that.
Or
That's
sending like really grotesque images to them,
right.
or like
Well, I don't.
going beyond just
Yeah,
like
that might
being
be too.
mean.
Yeah.
I mean, it kind of. I mean, sure. Like, imagine like somebody sending a chick that like dick pics and stuff. That could definitely be harassment,
Right.
right? That's
Right.
that's
Well,
that's
that's like sexual harassment, right? That's like a
right.
very known.
Sexual,
Yeah.
exactly.
But then also like you gotta be like careful because like the word harassment is also like a legal term too, and
Hmm.
like a lot of like someone sending you a mean tweet on Twitter like isn't gonna like the police don't care. Like they shouldn't care. It's
Right.
free speech. Like if they say, "Oh, you're a fucking asshole. I hate you. Go kill yourself." Well, kill yourself might be inappropriate.
Kill yourself, maybe.
That's
Or if they
terms of
say something
service
like,
maybe, right? But that's not like the police aren't gonna come arrest you for saying go kill yourself. So like
or
I
if
don't
you
know.
make like
That's
a
what I'm trying to
bomb
use.
threat to somebody, or like, or you say like, I know where you live. I'm gonna come like to your house and do something. Like those are just words, but I mean, they could be seen as a viable threat or harassment. So, but yeah, tough to define.
All right. Well, this guy.
Guess
Hang
we
on,
did that question
I gotta
already.
ban somebody from. I gotta. I'll delete the post at least. Someone is promoting like a weird far right website or something. A troll. Not someone I recognize.
Yeah,
Not someone from my community. Um,
gotta love those weird far right
which I don't care. Like I'm free.
websites.
I'm a free speech person.
Yeah,
But you can't like don't come on here and try and promote stuff. You know.
yeah, exactly. Well, free speech is a
Yeah.
doesn't apply to your own community necessarily.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I allow like a huge array of discussions and disagreements. So.
Sure, but of course, then there's like the spamming, like
Yeah.
trying to promote shit is like can be.
Why do you think the media largely didn't cover harassment against GamerGate supporters?
Again, I think it's mostly. I think it's partly the narrative, right? You don't want to paint your own side as the harassers when this is and or there's the idea that, oh well, if this is a harassment campaign, then that's what they get. They play with fire, then they get harassed back. Some people probably really believe that. Um, and then maybe gamer gators didn't talk about it as much either, so it wasn't as well known. Or because it wasn't covered, it wasn't as well known. It's a vicious circle.
Do you have any thoughts on Zack Attack? Do you remember this?
Zack Attack. Remind me.
Where
Is that a
mom?
YouTuber?
No. So Mombot, you know Mombot on Twitter.
Uh huh.
So
Yeah.
she basically this anti-GamerGate group called they called themselves Zack Attack, or we called them
Oh.
that after. But they basically didn't they wanted to dox her because they thought that she was a man. Because
Mm.
no woman could hold the opinions that she holds, basically, right? And so Rudderhouse, he's a GamerGate guy. He infiltrated their community and like pretended to be a social justice warrior and hated GamerGate and all this stuff. And he actually got them all in a group DM on Twitter, a DM group, and they were trying to dox her and expose that she's a man, right, in reality, and put her information out there. So he leaked out all the logs of them trying to do
Oh.
this. Yeah. Well, they also created
I
like
do. I do.
they created a whole fake like profile and stuff on Facebook and try and like just to try and bait them into it, but they fell
Hmm.
for it. And but um, so they did it in part because they didn't like her too, but also too apparently, Coops or sorry 9 Volt, one of the people who was a member of the group of the Zekatech group, he didn't like her too because she had said that he sent her She faked DMs basically, claiming that that 9 Volt had sent her a request for feet pictures.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
but
See,
but then she revealed like 5 hours later, like, hey, no, it's a fake. I was just trolling him, right? And it was
yeah,
so she didn't like try to get him fired or destroy his life or anything. But
yeah.
this upset him and some other people, and so that's part of the reason they wanted to go after her too.
See, all of this sort of is what I would say is why it's just easier to have a simple narrative. Is that like when you talk about all this stuff, it's like there's so many little groups and there's so many little skirmishes, and that 99% of people in the world will never understand, will never really understand any of that. So it's much easier just to have a simple narrative that Gamergate is a harassment campaign or that Gamergate is a freedom fighting campaign or whatever it is. Whereas like the complexities of it are like so so much crazier and so online and so so much more than even someone like me who was involved and I just vaguely remember stuff like that, like it was a lot.
Do you have any thoughts on the Con Skype leak?
Don't remember that.
The Crash Override Network group that Zoe Quinn started, their
Mm.
Skype group, well, a member of the group, I know who it was, but they aren't willing to go public. They released all the information, all the logs, and it revealed a whole bunch of really bad stuff that they were doing. You
Well,
should
I
cover
think
that.
so.
Was a whole story. That was you
Yeah.
missed out. That would have been a juicy one for you to
Yeah,
cover, really.
that's probably when I was already done with it all. I know Zoe Quinn was part of, a lot of those people were part of uh you know groups before all of this that were like left-wing troll groups and whatnot. So there was a
Something
lot.
awful
I
they were
really
part
think
of.
there's a right something awful and whatnot. And so there is beneath all of this like troll factions at work trying to take each other down. And that's like another layer to what actually happened that was going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, that hasn't been explored as much. I mean, I've interviewed two of the third-party trolls, like the people who are like just out there to fuck with everybody.
Right.
Um, Now, but like obviously, like there were like 4chan was involved, something awful was
Hmm.
involved. I've
Yeah.
interviewed people from like these communities, people who posted like in these communities, right? But like not people who were like I guess engaging in harassment for the most part.
Right.
I guess those
That
people probably
shows like
wouldn't
that
come.
was a real element to
Well,
this, like a
the
real like
third-party trolls I've interviewed who like, well,
yeah.
Pterodax, he was a big troll back
It
then.
feels familiar. Yeah, that rings a bell.
Yeah, I interviewed him, and Avius too. He was a troll. He didn't even know what GamerGate was actually, but he just
Yeah, it's
wanted to
just
fuck with like Brianna Wu, and because like he thought she was a lol
yeah.
cow and stuff. Oh, actually, because he was like a right wing troll actually too.
Okay. Yeah. So there was a lot of that going on. Underneath the rest of this stuff.
All right, we've got two more questions in harassment, then we can probably wrap it up for part one if that works for you.
Okay. That works for me. That sounds great.
Okay. Some GamerGate supporters broke away from the movement, or well, sorry, do you know what GG Revolt was? What do you think of that?
Was that like it's like a forum that
Yeah, so
that
8chan's
started.
GG Revolt. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have an opinion on that.
Okay.
I
All
don't
right.
remember it well enough. I just don't remember it well enough what that was all about. So
All right. And what do you
I
think
know
of
you stand.
the term sea lioning and how critics of Gamergate use the term?
Um, it was clever rhetorically, like to diminish and lampoon gamergaters. And that's what these battles often result in, right? Is some ways to label and to uh, dehumanize or to caricaturize. So I think it was. I think it was silly, but also at the time, I'm not going to lie. Like, I read enough tweets from people talking about ethics in game journalism or telling me that my reviews should be unbiased or objective that I got to a point where I was kind of tired of hearing it. I didn't call anyone sea lions, but that's like reviews are not totally objective. They're not totally unbiased. That totally defeat the point of reviews. So there were lots of things like that I just got tired of hearing. So I can understand where like you respond to that with humor and mockery, and it's also rhetorically savvy. But ultimately, like it diminished valid concerns that people had as well.
Cool. Well, hey, Eric, anything else you want to talk about for part one?
No, let's just. I think this is a great place to wrap it up. And then you said what's left for part two?
Absolutely. We have media coverage of Gamergate. That's 9 questions. Then we
Okay.
have light items. That's 3 questions. One of them's what's your favorite video game? So be prepared, okay?
Ah, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And then we
I
have
prepared.
10 questions, which are reflections. Your reflections on
Okay.
everything, what you've learned, your favorite moment. I sent you the question list, right?
Maybe. I
If
don't
not,
think
I can
I don't.
resend
I
it to
don't
you.
think. I don't think you did.
Oh no. Oh, I'm sorry.
I don't think you did, but that's okay. I don't mind. I don't mind not knowing questions in advance. I mean,
I mean, I can send it to you if you want.
I'm very. Nah, you
Okay.
just gave me the questions. I'll be
All
fine.
right. And then
Um,
closing questions too. There's 6 of those.
okay, perfect. Yeah, yeah. We'll just let's hammer out a time in the near future to do that, and even like I should probably have time next week. So if you have
Cool.
time, but I'm
Yeah,
flexible.
probably. If
So,
not, the
okay.
week after might work. So,
Okay. Perfect.
well, hey,
Sounds
thanks,
good. Thank
Eric.
you.
Yeah.
This was very engaging and an interesting subject. So
Yeah. Oh,
hopefully
are
some of
you
my
live
answers are
on your
useful.
end?
No.
Okay, because I was gonna raid you, but I can raid somebody
Yeah.
else.
No. I wasn't sure kind of what the deal with that was. So, but no, this is yeah, it's great. So,
Oh, hey, thank you so much for coming on, man. We're gonna go ahead and raid. Biden speech at NATO. Dylan Burns is covering it, and Russia bombing a children's hospital. So,
awesome.
yep.
That sounds
Hey,
very
well, not
exciting.
awesome that they got bombed, I guess, right? But
No, not. All right. Well, thank you again.
thank you.
I'll talk to you next.